Hello and welcome to the STARChronicle Series, Explorations in SAP S4HANA for the Digital Learner. I'm Adam Dabrowski, and I'm with the STAR Scholars Program at St. Joseph's University. Today, we'll be stepping into the Finance suite of SAP's newest software, S4HANA, to examine the process of direct posting and financial reporting. If your professor has provided you with a direct posting and financial reporting script, you may use it to follow along as we complete the various steps of the process. The agenda for this session is broken down into two sections, concept and application. In the concept section, we'll start with a brief overview of direct posting and financial reporting in SAP S4HANA, followed by an explanation of our Global Bike Incorporated scenario, a review of the SMART framework as it pertains to direct posting, and finally, a listing of the transaction codes needed for the direct posting process. In the application section, we'll log on to SAP S4HANA and complete the process of direct posting and financial reporting for ourselves. As an overview, the process of direct posting and financial reporting takes place in the Finance suite of SAP S4HANA and is used to record transactions and view reports in the SAP system. This process can be used to view reports for financial accounting, managerial accounting, and other processes. The direct posting and financial reporting process is also known as the record to report process. In this session, we will be stepping into the role of Global Bike Incorporated to see how each step of the direct posting and financial reporting process is carried out within SAP S4HANA. Global Bike Incorporated, or GBI for short, is a wholesaler of bicycles and bicycle accessories and currently has operations in the United States and Germany. GBI uses state-of-the-art SAP software to digitalize their business operations and is led by CEO Art Vandelay. To record the transactions that have occurred during the current period, GBI accountants must post entries to the general ledger within their SAP system. After posting these entries, GBI accountants must view several SAP-generated financial reports to evaluate the company's performance. To examine the various components of the process of direct posting and financial reporting, we will use the SMART framework. The first step in the SMART framework is S, which stands for Organizational Structure. There are a few items pertaining to organizational structure to understand before we can get into the direct posting and financial reporting process. The first of these terms, client, represents the database of the company that you are working for. Because we are Global Bike Incorporated, we are assigned a 3-digit client number by SAP that needs to be entered anytime we want to access the GBI database. The second piece of structure is the company code, or user. This designates the general ledger of the company that we are working for. Because we are working for Global Bike Incorporated, each employee is assigned an individual company code, or user, that specifies their general ledger and system authorizations. The second step in the SMART framework is M, which stands for Master Files. Master files are data entries within the SAP database that store information about things such as employees, businesses, and materials, just to name a few. For example, if you have an Amazon account, the information that you entered when you first created your account, like your name and address, serves as your master file within Amazon's database. When you sign into Amazon and make a purchase, your master file tells Amazon things such as who made the purchase, how the purchase will be paid for, and to what address the order will be shipped. The SAP master file pertaining to direct posting and financial reporting is the chart of accounts. The chart of accounts is a complete list of all accounts in the SAP system general ledger. Every time a transaction is recorded in the SAP system, the financial values of the transaction are debited or credited to two or more of the accounts located in the chart of accounts. As a key component of SAP system controls, each company code has its own individual chart of accounts, which varies based on company code permissions and authorizations. Although several company codes can access the same chart of accounts if system authorizations allow, each company code is assigned one and only one chart of accounts. Moving on to the A, or application process step of the SMART framework, we'll now take a look at the application process of direct posting. The first step in direct posting is to enter the document's date and, if necessary, the document's reference. Remember that a reference needs to be entered only if the transaction affects the cash account. For example, if we sold 10 shares of $10 par value common stock for cash, the first thing we need to do is to enter the transaction's date into the system, as well as the reference of financing. The second step is to enter the account numbers of the accounts that are being debited by the transaction, as well as the financial value of the debits. Account numbers are 6 digits in length and can be entered into the SAP system by either directly typing the account number in or selecting the account from the chart of accounts. Because we're gaining cash from the sale of common stock, we will debit the cash account for $100. The third step is to enter the account numbers of the accounts that are being credited by the transaction, as well as the financial value of the credits. Once again, account numbers are 6 digits in length and can be entered into the system by either directly typing the account number in or selecting the account from the chart of accounts. Because we're increasing the amount of common stock we have outstanding from the sale, we will credit the common stock account for $100. Next, after all accounts and financial values related to the transaction have been entered, we will review the data we've entered thus far to ensure accuracy and completeness. We will review the document date, the reference, the accounts to be debited, and the accounts to be credited to ensure that they are accurate to the transaction. To assist us in assuring that the value of the debits matches the value of the credits, we can reference the Amount Information section of the SAP Direct Posting transaction. The last step is to simulate the transaction entry and save it into the database of the SAP system. Simulating the entry enables us to view the in-system effects of the entry before it is definitively saved into the SAP system. Simulating provides us with a view of the entry that is formatted to match the format of a saved entry. Once we're positive that the entry accurately represents the transaction, we must save it into the database of the SAP system. If we do not save the entry, it will not change the account balances displayed in the ledger and will not be displayed in SAP ledger reports. The next step in the SMART framework is R, which stands for reports. One of the SAP software's greatest features is its robust reporting capability. Between the thousands of reports that SAP can generate based off of the data stored in the database, there are 4 specific reports that pertain to the process of direct posting and financial reporting. The first of these reports is the General Ledger Report, displayed here in the top left-hand corner. The General Ledger Report enables the user to view the debit and credit balances of various sets of accounts in the SAP chart of accounts. This report can be used to view the balances of only a select few accounts, or the balances of all accounts located in the SAP General Ledger. Next, the cash flow statement, pictured in the top right-hand corner, allows us to view a summary of the transactions that have impacted the cash account. We can format the cash flow statement in several different ways to view specific details about cash account transactions, as well as to view a summative report of cash account transactions categorized by their respective operating, investing, and financing references. The income statement, shown in the bottom left-hand corner, provides an array of details pertaining to the operations of the business. Like any conventional income statement, this report will show the balances of the revenue and expense accounts in the SAP General Ledger, and provides the user with an automatically computed net income figure. Lastly, the Cost Center Variance report, pictured in the bottom right-hand corner, is a cost accounting-based report that compares each actual cost incurred by the business to its planned value that was budgeted for at the beginning of the period. This report references the budgets that have been pre-recorded in the SAP system to generate a series of favorable or unfavorable variances for each account. The last step in the SMART framework is T, which stands for Test Controls. In this step, we will undergo a mini audit to evaluate the completed direct posting and financial reporting process. The evaluations completed in this step are done to assure the accuracy and completeness of the SAP system's ability to facilitate each step of direct posting and financial reporting. In order to understand the underlying set of controls that govern both the activities of the SAP system and of the business, we will need to know things like why each user is assigned their own individual cash account, and why access to the document entry transaction is highly restrictive. Additionally, we will need to evaluate the full reports we discussed in the R step of the SMART framework through the lens of a systems auditor in order to ensure that there are no indications that the numbers displayed on the SAP reports have been fabricated. We must also ensure that there are no areas in the process where unauthorized access could have occurred. Once these evaluations are completed, we will need to mention the findings to GBI CEO Art Vandelay in the emails that we sent him in the application section of this session. The last thing we need to do before we log in to SAP S/4HANA is to review the transaction codes necessary for the process of direct posting and financial reporting. Every transaction in the SAP system is identified by a unique code number called a transaction code, or a T code for short. SAP allows for users to enter these unique code numbers as another means of navigating directly to a transaction. Essentially, T codes are shortcuts that we can use to access transactions or functions of the SAP system much more quickly. Once we log into SAP, we will add these T codes into our favorites folder for ease of access. The first of these transaction codes is FB50, which allows us to directly enter transactions into the SAP system's general ledger. Next, our first SALR T code enables us to view the general ledger report. FAGLB03 is the transaction that allows us to view the cash flow statement. Our second SALR T code allows us to view the income statement. Finally, our last SALR T code enables us to view the Cost Center Variance report. Now that we've completed the concept section of our direct posting and financial reporting session, and you've learned a bit about the background of the direct posting process and how it works, we can move on to the application section and log into SAP S/4HANA to complete the process of direct posting and financial reporting for ourselves. Hello everyone, and welcome to the application section of our SAP S/4HANA direct posting and financial reporting session. As we had just learned in the concept section, we touched on some of the key terms and some of the key frameworks of the direct posting and financial reporting process, as well as the SMART framework as it pertains to this process, just to get a better understanding of how direct posting and financial reporting works kind of behind the scenes and in the system of SAP. So now that we've done that, we can actually hop into SAP S/4HANA and complete this direct posting and financial reporting process for ourselves. So the first thing that we'll need to do is to open up the SAP instance menu to log into our correct server. And there are a few different ways of doing that. So the first way is if you navigate over to this blue and yellow chevron icon that says SAP Logon on your desktop. If you have this icon on your desktop, you can go ahead and just double click on that, and then we'll open the instance menu for you. If you don't have that, there are two other ways of finding it. The first of which, if you navigate down to your bottom taskbar and you find your little search field, you can go ahead and click in here, and if you type in SAP, the SAP Logon application will appear right up here, and you can double click on it from there to open the instance menu. Or finally, if you click out, you can always navigate down to your Windows Start menu by clicking the Windows icon on the bottom taskbar. And you can scroll all the way down to S, and you'll see an SAP folder. If you open that up, here is the SAP Logon application. So we can click on that, and it will open up our SAP instance menu for us. So just to make this full screen view, we can go ahead and click on the full screen icon. And we're presented here with a list of instances or servers offered to us by SAP. Now that we're in our SAP Logon instance menu, there are a few things you'll want to note before we go ahead and select the instance and the SAP product that we want to log into. The first of which is this Workspaces menu located on the left-hand side of the screen. And you should have two options under that Workspaces dropdown. The first one will be Local, and the second one will be UW Milwaukee UCC. Now, if you're selected on Local, you'll notice that there aren't any instances or servers here for us to log onto. However, if you click to the second option down of UW Milwaukee UCC, which is where we want to be, you'll see that there is a full list populated of several different SAP instances. So all of these instances are offered to us through the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, hence why this option is named as such. And each one of these different instances that you see here offers a different SAP product. So for example, if you take a look here at instance BUELL, you can see that this instance offers us SAP S4HANA. However, if we scroll down a little bit to perhaps this #DS1, this will take us instead to SAP ERP IDES. And this is just an older version of the current S4HANA software. But as you can see, there are a lot of different SAP products here. So the instance that we're looking for is Harley. And because these are ordered in alphabetical order, we can navigate over here to the right-hand side of the window to the scroll bar, and we can scroll down to about halfway through this instance menu. And here we find our #Harley instance, and it's denoted as the correct product. It's SAP S4HANA, so we can go ahead and double click on that one so we can log in. And after we double click, you'll see that it presents us with our SAP Logon menu. Once in the SAP Logon menu, there are a few key pieces of organizational structure that we'll need to enter before we can actually log into the SAP system. The first thing we'll want to note in this screen is what is found under the Information section in the middle of the screen. Now this is where it gives us just some brief details about the system that we'll be logging into, and we can ensure that we're logging into SAP S4HANA by checking this middle text here, and it says, "Welcome to SAP S4HANA," so we can make sure that we're logging into the correct system. So if we navigate over to the left-hand side, we see a few empty fields that we'll need to enter in. As you can see, there are red asterisks next to the user and password fields. And anytime you see a red asterisk in the SAP system, that designates a key piece of information or organizational structure that needs to be entered. So for our purposes, in order to authenticate ourselves in the SAP system, there are three key things that we need to enter. And they're the client number, the user, and the password. So first, we'll want to navigate to the client field. And if you remember from the concept section of this session, you'll remember that the client designates the database and the company of which we're working for. So because we're working for Global Bike Incorporated, SAP has designated or given us the client number of 502. So in this client field here, we can go ahead and type in 502. And that will tell the SAP system and the server that we are trying to access and work out of the Global Bike Incorporated database. After we've entered our client identifier of 502, which designates the Global Bike Incorporated database, the next piece of organizational structure that we'll need to enter is the user identifier. So if we navigate to the user field, which is located underneath the client field, and click in, this is where we'll enter our unique user identifier. If we remember back to the concept section of this session, we can remember that the user identifier is what designates one specific user's general ledger, chart of accounts, and set of specific system authorizations. So no two users are identical, and because of that, every user will have their own unique identifier. So the identifier always consists of characters, both numerical and alphabetical. And for our purposes at St. Joseph's University, the user is always learn dash and then a 3-digit identifier. Now, this 3-digit identifier is what truly is unique per each different user. Everyone has a different 3-digit identifier. And this will come in handy throughout our process today because there are several points throughout the SAP system where you will need to use your 3-digit identifier. So for my purposes, for my user identifier, I have the 3 digits of 089. So in my user identifier field, you can click in, I can type in the alphabetical portion, which is learn, and a dash, and then my 3-digit identifier, which is 089, and we've entered our user identifier. Now, again, this is specific to my user and my set of system authorizations, but you will have your own unique user identifier. So to ensure that you're logging in with the correct user, please just make sure that you check with your administrator or your professor to make sure that you're logging in with the correct user. And lastly, after we've successfully entered our client identifier and our user identifier, the last piece of organizational structure that we need to enter before we can log into the SAP system is our password. Now, the password functions just the same as a password for any other application or any other software, in that it's the last line of defense in authenticating a specific user. Now, this password is specific per user. Everyone has their own individualized password. And in my purpose for my user learn-089, my password is all lowercase star and a 089. Once again, that 3-digit identifier. Here again, you'll want to check with your system administrator or your professor prior to logging into the system to ensure that you will be using the correct password. So now we can review our three pieces of organizational structure that we've entered to make sure that they're correct. So we have our client identifier to designate our Global Bike Incorporated database. We have our user identifier to specify us as the user who will be accessing the system. And of course, the password, which is the last line of defense in authenticating us as the user. And once we have all three key pieces of organizational structure entered, we can go ahead and hit the Enter key on our keyboard, and this will log us into the SAP system. If you log in successfully, the system will present you with this message that is basically just telling you you're logging into SAP S/4HANA using the Global Bike 3.2, in this case, client configuration, and it gives you some session dates here. But all we have to do, because this is simply a confirmation, is we can go ahead and click the green checkmark icon in the bottom menu bar of the window. And this will bring us into SAP Standard Menu. Now that we're in the SAP Standard Menu, there are a few key elements that we will need to familiarize ourselves with before we hop into the direct posting and financial reporting process. The SAP Standard Menu is the jumping off point for the many different transactions and functions of the SAP system. From this standard menu, you can navigate to all of these different transactions and functions using these folders, or nodes as we call them, located under the SAP menu option on the left-hand side of the screen. So, for example, if we wanted to menu map using these nodes to perhaps enter an entry into the SAP ledger, which we'll be doing shortly, we could go ahead and navigate to the accounting node because direct posting pertains to accounting. And we click on this arrow to drop down. And from here, you'll see that there are several different subcategories or subnodes located under the main accounting node. So on one hand, as I had just mentioned, if we wanted to go in and post an entry into the SAP ledger, we could continue this financial accounting node all the way down to general ledger and document entry. And this first transaction, this FP50, is where we would go to enter that entry in. But say instead we wanted to access the cost accounting or the managerial accounting transactions within the SAP system. Instead of accessing financial accounting, which we can close by clicking the arrow to the left, we would want to access the controlling subnode. And in here is where we could access the different functions related to cost accounting, such as cost center accounting or cost element accounting, which is per account. But to access these transactions even easier than this long-winded method of menu mapping, we can use something that we like to call transaction codes, or T codes. Now, we touched on T codes a little bit in the concept section of this session. And if you remember what we discussed, we mentioned that these T codes are basically shortcuts that we can use from our SAP menu to navigate more quickly and more easily to a direct transaction instead of having to go through this menu mapping method of clicking into each of these nodes and subnodes. So in order to condense this back to the SAP menu as you had first seen it, we can navigate up top to the top menu bar and find this SAP menu icon. It's located directly to the right of the search bar. So if we click on that SAP menu icon once, it will bring everything back to the way it was displayed when we first logged into the system. Now we'll want to enter in the specific transaction codes that pertain to the process of direct posting and financial reporting, so we can more quickly and more easily access them without having to go through the SAP standard menu and menu map. The way we do that is if we navigate up to the More menu here and click the drop down, the first thing we'll want to do is ensure that transaction codes are turned on and enabled within the SAP system. If we navigate down to the Extras option, and from this little side menu that appears, we can select Settings and we can click on that. It will bring up a small settings window with 4 different options. Now, my display technical names here has already been checked, which means T-codes have already been enabled in the SAP system. However, if it is your first time using the SAP system, this box may not be checked for you. So if you have this settings menu here and you see that the box next to display technical names is not checked, you can go ahead and click in that box to select it and to check it. And once you have that option checked, you can go ahead, navigate to the green check mark icon in the bottom menu bar and click it. And T-codes will now be enabled within your SAP system. Now that we have T-codes enabled within our SAP system, we can now go through and enter in the 5 specific transaction codes that pertain to the process of direct posting and financial reporting. So in order to add these to our favorites, we can once again navigate to our More menu at the top on the top menu bar and drop this down. And now we'll want to hover over the Favorites option. And if we navigate to the Insert Transaction option, we can go ahead and click on that. And it will pop up with a window where we can enter in the transaction codes that we want to enter into our favorites. The first transaction code that we'll want to enter into our favorites folder is the T-code for document entry. If your professor has provided you with a direct posting and financial reporting script, you will see on the front of that script, as well as within it, there are a list of the 5 transaction codes that we'll want to enter in. So that is where you can find the list of specific T-codes. So the first one, as I had noted, is the T-code for document entry. And the transaction code for document entry is FB50. Now, once you have this transaction code entered into the field, in order to successfully save it to your favorites folder, all you need to do is navigate to the bottom menu bar and click on the green check mark icon. And as you can see, it will appear up top under your favorites folder with a star next to it, which designates that the FB50 transaction code for document entry is saved as a favorite. In order to add the other 4 transaction codes needed for direct posting and financial reporting to our favorites folder, we'll need to follow the same process we used to add the FB50 transaction code. If we navigate to the top menu bar and click on the More icon, and in the drop-down menu, select Favorites, and finally Insert Transaction, we'll once again be met by the manual entry of a transaction screen. And just as before, in this manual entry of a transaction window, we can go ahead and enter in the T-code to view our general ledger report. Now, a note about these transaction codes for specific reports in the SAP system is that these T-codes are rather complicated. Because the reporting within the SAP system is so sophisticated and specific, the T-codes that go along with each individual report are a complicated series of letters and numbers. So if your professor has handed you a script for the direct posting and financial reporting process, you can find the identifiers for all of these transaction codes on the front cover of that script. If you have not been provided a direct posting and financial reporting script, I will pause after we type in each of the T-codes in this window for these reports so that you can copy them down for yourselves. Just please make sure that in order to navigate to the correct report and the exact one that we're looking for, that you enter the T codes exactly as they're shown on the screen. So as I had noted on before, the first T code we're going to be entering is to view the general ledger report. So in our window, if we click in the transaction code field, we can begin by typing in the T code, which is S underscore ALR, another underscore, 870122277. Now here again, I'll pause right here on this window for a second or two so you can write this number down and ensure it is the correct transaction code. And once we have that written down, we have that all typed in correctly, we can navigate to the bottom menu bar to the green check mark icon and go ahead and click that. And you can see that that's added into our favorites. Now, as you can see, after we added this GL account balances report or general ledger report to our favorites folder, it got added at the top above our Fiori Launchpad and our previously entered FB50 document entry favorite. In order to move this down so that it is in chronological order and it's easier to follow, all we have to do is hover over our SALR GL account balances T code here and click and drag it so that it goes underneath FB50. And now you can see we're in proper chronological order here. So first we will enter some entries into the SAP ledger, and then we'll go ahead and view some of the reports. So just make sure now that you have single-clicked on this GL account balances T code here, so that once we go up and add the other T codes, they will be added underneath it. So next, just as before, we can navigate to the More icon located on the top menu bar and click it, navigate down to Favorites, and once again down to Insert Transaction. And now this time we're going to be entering the transaction code to view the cash flow statement. And the T code for the cash flow statement is FAGLB03. And I'll pause here for a second so that you can write this down and get this T code right. And once we have that typed in, we can once again navigate to the green check mark icon and click enter. And it will be entered underneath our GL account balances report here. So to add the second to last T code favorite, we'll go to More, Favorites, and then down to Insert Transaction. And for another one of these kind of long, complicated T codes, the one for the income statement, which is the next report we will view, is S underscore ALR with another underscore, 870122284. And here again, I'll pause so you can write this one down and ensure that the characters are correct. And then we can go ahead to the green checkmark icon and click on that, and it will be registered under our favorites here. Now for our final transaction code favorite that we'll want to add is the Cost Center Variance Report T code. So for the final time, we can navigate up to More on the top menu bar, to Favorites, down to Insert Transaction. And the transaction code for our Cost Center Variance Report is our S underscore ALR, another underscore, 870136111. And I'll move my cursor off so you can go ahead and write this number down and enter it in to make sure it's the correct transaction code. And once in, we can go ahead and hit enter. And now we have our complete list of our 5 different transaction codes favorites needed for the direct posting and financial reporting process. We have our document entry transaction code that we'll use to enter our journal entries into the SAP ledger. And then The T codes to view are 4 different reports. So now that we've successfully entered in our transaction code favorites, we can go ahead into the first step of the direct posting and financial reporting process, which is to record several entries into the SAP General Ledger. So if we navigate over to our T code favorites menu and click on our first FB50 for our document entry, we can double click. And because it is our first time accessing this transaction, we'll have to enter our company code. So if you remember back to the concept section of this session, you'll remember that the company code is what specifies the general ledger within an SAP database. It goes together along with our user identifier to authenticate the user and also to give access to the proper general ledger. So our company code, as this version of SAP S/4HANA is a single company code, we will go ahead and click in our company code box, and we'll enter in the company code of US00. Now, for our purposes at Global Bike Incorporated, our company code is US00, as you can see from the dropdown, because the US signifies United States, as Global Bike Incorporated operates out of Dallas, which is in the United States, and 00 to identify this company code as a single general ledger. Alternatively to a single company code system, you could have a multiple company code system where within the SAP database there are several different general ledgers, and they're individualized based on the 2-digit identifier that follows the US. But again, because we're acting out of a single company code system, everyone will be using the company code US00. Once again, this is for demonstration purposes, so your individual case may be different. Just make sure to check with your professor or with your administrator to ensure the correct company code. So once we have that typed in, we can go ahead and click out of the auto-populated menu into the Enter Company Code window, and we can navigate to the bottom toolbar and click on the green checkmark icon to enter into our direct posting screen. Now that we're in our document entry or Enter GL account document transaction, there are a few fields we'll want to familiarize ourselves with, as we'll be using this transaction to enter 5 separate accounting entries. So you can think of this transaction as the digital version of completing a debit and a credit or a journal entry on paper. As you can see, it still has your document date. It has a field open for a reference if the cash account is being affected in the transaction. And down here at the bottom, it has spaces to enter in the specific account number, the amount that the debit or the credit is worth, and a field here to select whether it is a debit or a credit. Another key field that we'll want to keep an eye on in the Enter GL account document transaction is the amount information section located on the right-hand side of the screen. Now, this is one of the most convenient things about using SAP to enter in accounting entries, because instead of having to calculate the balances of debits and credits by hand, which opens up for the possibility of human error or perhaps the error on the part of a calculator, the SAP system will automatically balance the debits and the credits and add them up for you. So, for example, if we entered our debits in before we entered our credits, the total balance of the debits would be displayed in this total debit field, and the total credit field would still show a 0 balance because we have not yet entered our credits. And you would see this yellow light down here, which signifies balance not yet determined. You would see it shift from yellow to red, which says that your debits are not in balance with your credits, and thusly the SAP system will not allow you to save the entry. And this is just a display of one out of many of the controls set forth in the SAP system to ensure that no entry can be posted to the SAP database and general ledger without being balanced. So now that we've reviewed some of the key components of the Enter GL account document transaction, we can hop into the first of our 5 accounting entries that we're going to be entering into the SAP database or general ledger. So the first entry that GBI has transacted in the current period is the sale of common stock. So what happened to prompt this transaction is in order to raise funds for Global Bike Incorporated, they issued some of their common stock, which was bought by new shareholders. So GBI issued 10,000 shares of their common stock at a $10 par value for $50 per share. Okay? So the first thing that we're going to do, as we always need to in all of our different entries, is enter in the document date of the transaction. And because we're not acting in the past, we're not acting in the future, we'll always be using the current date as our document date. So because in my case, today is May 19th, 2020, I will be entering in that date into the document date field. Now, there are 2 different ways that you can enter the date in. You can click in this field and you can type it in by hand, or you can also click this gray drop-down menu icon here, and you will be presented with a calendar view. And it auto-populates today's or the current date, which again in my case is May 19th, 2020. So all you have to do is go ahead and click on that, and it will default it into the document date field. Now the next thing we need to consider here is, do we need a reference? Now because we're issuing this common stock and we're receiving cash, that tells us that because that cash account is impacted by this transaction, we need a reference. So if we think using our accounting knowledge, and we remember the 3 different types of references, which are operating, financing, and investing. So if we remember, operating is used as a reference when the cash account is impacted in a way that it comes from our operations as a business, our day-to-day operations. So if this cash was coming into us by way of maybe a sale we made, that would be an instance that we would use the operating reference. Now, no sale of physical inventory happened here, so we know that we won't be using the operating reference. Now, if we move on to the next one, we could say investing. Well, investing is usually used in more kind of long-term operations and transactions where the cash account is affected. So, for example, if we were buying a fixed asset for GBI for our business that we expected to last maybe 10, 20 years, that would be an instance where we would use the investing reference. So lastly, the one we're left with is financing. And using the reference of financing would make sense in this case of the sale of common stock. We're issuing securities, whether they be in the form of bonds or stocks, for cash in order to raise money for the business. So we can go ahead into our reference box and we can go ahead and type in by hand our financing reference. Good. And now once we have the basic data in the header entered, we have our document date and we have our reference. We can now go down to the bottom portion of the screen and begin to enter in the proper accounts, debits or credits, and the amounts of those debits or credits that are all being impacted by this transaction. Now the first account that we'd like to enter is, of course, our debited account. And in this case, because we're selling this common stock for cash, we will be debiting or increasing the cash account. So if we navigate down to the bottom portion of the screen under the GL account field in this first one, we can go ahead and if we knew the account number of our cash account, we could type it in by hand. Now, in this case, we're not sure yet what the exact account number of our cash account is. We can click in and once again click on this little gray magnifying glass icon to bring up a search menu. Now, what happens here is it brings up my user identifiers favorites list. And these are all of the different accounts that we would find throughout the chart of accounts that we name as prominent or important, and the ones that we use the most often when we enter entries into the SAP database. Now, this is nice, but say that you didn't have this set up, and instead you just had your plain GBI chart of accounts up. So if we navigate to that GBI chart of accounts by clicking our little global icon up here, you'll see that we get brought up to a search menu. And this is where we can search the entire GBI chart of accounts for a few specific accounts. And in this case, we're looking for our cash account. Now, each individual user in our SAP database, because it is a single company code, has their own unique individualized cash account. And that's the one that when you go through and do these entries, you'll be using to debit or credit depending on what the entry is. Now, conversely, if this were a multiple company code system, you might be able to use just a normal plain cash account because you would have your own specific general ledger. But once again, because in my case, this SAP database is set up in the form of a single company code, we'll be referencing my individual cash account. So to search for the cash account, we're going to want to make sure that we are in the search tab of GL account number in company code. This is what's going to allow us to find our individual cash account the easiest. Now, if you don't have this specific search tab pre-populated for you, all you have to do is navigate over to this little three-dot icon on the top right-hand side of our search screen and click on it, and it will give you all of the different search criteria that you could use to navigate through the chart of accounts. And all you have to do is navigate down to our GL account number in company code and click once. And of course, you're brought up to the criteria that we're looking for. So in our GL account search field here, we can go ahead and click in. We know that we have our company code of US00 already pre-populated in there. We entered that when we first got into this document entry transaction. But if you don't have your company code populated in there, you can go ahead and type it in to just condense this search to your specific ledger. Now in this GL account field here, instead of searching for the entire 6-digit account number, we can actually just search using a few specific digits. Now, we know that our own individual cash account ends in that 3-digit identifier that we used in our user identifier when we first logged in. So in order to search for that here, all we have to do is type in the 3-digit identifier. However, in order to tell the system that you're using that 3-digit identifier, you first have to type in an asterisk. So if we type in our asterisk here, and we type our 3-digit identifier after that, that's going to allow us to search our chart of accounts for all the accounts that end in our 3-digit identifier. Now, say if you were searching the chart of accounts for an account that was beginning with your 3-digit identifier, you would type in your 3-digit identifier and then an asterisk, and it would eliminate the chart of accounts down and the search down to only accounts that begin with that 3-digit identifier. So you can think of our asterisk as a sort of placeholder. So if you put the asterisk at the end of whatever digits you're entering to search with, that is signifying that you're looking for an account that begins in those numbers, and that everything after that asterisk can be used in or will be brought up in the search and is not specific. Now, in our case, because we know that we don't know what the account begins with, but we do know that it ends in our 3-digit identifier, we'll want to type in the asterisk first and then our 3-digit identifier. So in my case, my identifier is 089. And now what this search is going to do is it is going to bring up every single account that ends in 089, regardless of the first 3 digits, because we know since we put the asterisk at the beginning of this series, it isn't important necessarily what these accounts begin with. So once we have our GL account 3-digit identifier plugged in, as well as our company code, you can go ahead and either click the green check mark icon here in the bottom right-hand corner, or you can just hit the Enter key on your keyboard, and it will bring up every account within your US00, your company code's chart of accounts, that ends with the number you were looking for. So as you can see, it brings up my cash account, which it ends in 089. And to select that and bring that into our document entry screen, all we have to do is double click on the GL account number, and it will populate it in our document entry screen. Now that we've gone through the search and entered in our individual cash account, we'll want to move from left to right, and the next column here is the D/C, and this is where you signify whether the account you've entered is going to be debited or credited. Now, in this case, the normal balance of the cash account is, of course, a debit, and because we're gaining cash from the sale of common stock, we're going to want to debit the cash account in order to increase it. So if we click this drop down, we'll select the second option down of debit, and it will populate in the D/C column. Now, if we move over one field to the right to our amount in document currency, this is where we'll enter for how much the cash account is being debited for. Now, if we do some math and we compute that we issued 10,000 shares of GBI common stock at $50 per share, because that's the market value, we will be gaining in total $500,000 from the sale of common stock. So in this field, we can go ahead and type in our 500,000. There we go. And once we have these 3 key pieces of structure plugged in here, our GL account number, our debit or credit, and the amount of that debit or credit, you can go ahead and hit the Enter key on your keyboard to register that value within the SAP system. And once we hit Enter, some of these other fields pre-populate. The first thing we take note of is on the far left, we have a green check mark now, which signifies that everything we've entered in this line item, our cash account and our debit for 500,000, that all computes within the system. There are no errors there. And we can see that after hitting enter, the full name of our cash account, as opposed to just the account number, has been populated, as well as the value date over here. This is just the date when, of course, that debit or credit was entered into the system. And lastly, we check our amount information section, and we can now see that the total debits of our entry thus far equal 500,000, but yet the total credits of this entry have a $0 balance, and that's because we haven't entered the balancing credit entries yet. And as I noted on before, you can see now that that icon has changed from a yellow light to a red light, and this is telling us that the entry that we have presently is not balanced and thusly will not be able to be saved in the SAP system. So now we need to go through and we need to enter in the balancing credit, the credited accounts to this entry. Now to enter the first of the 2 credited accounts to balance this entry out, We can navigate to the GL account field once again, but now under the next line item down under our cash entry. Now, if we think back to what occurred in this transaction, that we sold this common stock, 10,000 shares of common stock, for a $10 par value, but at a $50 market value, we have to credit the common stock account only for the amount of the shares multiplied by the par value of the stock. Because if you remember back to maybe your accounting curriculum, you'll know that the amount that's left over from the par value multiplied by the shares sold gets credited to an account called additional paid in capital. So if we once again navigate to our GL account field and click our magnifying glass icon to search our ledger for our common stock account, here is where we can once again work with the codified system within the SAP chart of accounts. So we know that all the cash accounts start with a 1. We know that some of the inventory accounts and the fixed asset accounts, as shown here, begin with 2. But if we go up to accounts starting with 3, that's where we'll find some of our payable accounts, our common stock accounts, and our additional paid in capital. So if you don't have this favorites list set up, we once again can click our display all values icon, and we can go ahead and search in our SAP chart of accounts for our common stock account. Now, as I just said, we know that this common stock account begins with the number 3, but we don't know the preceding 5 digits. But that's okay because we can once again use the asterisk to search using just that 3 identifier. So in our GL account number in company code search tab, we navigate to the GL account field, and in here all we have to do is type in 3 and then an asterisk after the 3. And if you remember back, this is signifying that we want to search the SAP chart of accounts for all the accounts that start with the digit 3, regardless of the other 5 digits that come after it. So once we have our company code entered, as well as our search criteria of 3, we can go ahead and hit the Enter key on our keyboard. And this will bring up the several different accounts in our chart of accounts in our company code that start with the number 3. So as you can see here, we can navigate down to about a little over halfway down the list, and we find that our common stock account 329000 is listed here. So now that we know that's the account we want, we can go ahead and double click on it, and it will, similarly to the cash account, populate in our GL account box. So moving again from left to right, we can move to the debit or credit column. And because the normal balance of the common stock account is a credit, and it's increasing because of the sale and the issuance of this stock, from this drop down, we'll want to select the credit option. And now we need to enter in the amount of the credit. So again, because the common stock account is only affected by the number of shares issued or sold times the par value or the face value of the stock, we can multiply our 10,000 shares issued by our $10 par value to get a total of $100,000. So we can go ahead and enter that into our amount field. And once again, we have all 3 pieces of info that we need typed in, which is the account number, the debit or the credit, and the amount. So we can hit the Enter key on our keyboard to register this in the SAP system. And you'll see once again that the line item has been cleared, signified by this green check mark. It populates the full name of the account and calculates the full amount of that credit, which is $100,000. And you'll see that that gets added to the credit field in our amount information section, but the entry is still off balance. There's still a value of $400,000 that needs to be assigned to an account. And that's what we'll do next. So as I had noted before, anytime common stock is issued or sold at a value that is above its par value, the remaining amount from the transaction gets credited to the additional paid in capital account. Now, if we navigate over to our GL account field here, we'll follow the same procedure as before, and we can go ahead and click on our gray magnifying glass icon and click on the display all values icon if you have your favorites list pre-populated. And here, again, we know that the additional paid in capital account is the same as the common stock account in that it starts with a 3. So we can enter the same criteria as before, which is a 3 and an asterisk, because we want to narrow our search to only the accounts in the chart of accounts that begin with a 3. Once we have our criteria in, as well as our company code of US00, and we are in our GL account number in company code search tab, we can go ahead and hit the enter key on our keyboard. And once again, you'll see that the additional paid in capital account is located right below the common stock account, and it has the number of 329100. So once we find that, we can go ahead and double click on it, and it will be populated into our document entry screen. Now, because this common stock was sold at a market value of $50 per share, which is 40 more than the $10 per share par value, we know that there's an amount that needs to be credited to the additional paid in capital account. And it's a credit because the normal balance of the additional paid in capital account is, of course, a credit. And because it's being increased by this transaction, the account will be credited. So once we have our account number in, we can go ahead over and in our D/C column, we can go ahead and click the drop down and select credit. And now we have to enter the amount of this credit to the additional paid in capital account. Now, of course, we could do this by hand and figure out, what is 50 times 10,000, which was the market value of the common stock issued, multiplied by the 10,000 common stock shares that have been issued. And we could subtract from that the 10,000 shares multiplied by the par value of the stock, which is, of course, $10. Or we could take the difference of the two values and say that we have a $40 difference and multiply that by the 10,000 shares that have been issued. And both of those methods will give us the proper amount to be entered into this field. However, when we do it manually, either using a calculator or mental math or on paper with a pencil, there is always the possibility of encountering a human error or maybe an error on the calculator's part. So in order to avoid those errors, the SAP system will automatically calculate the value of the last line item for you. And all you have to do for that calculation to occur is navigate over to the amount in document currency field for the very last line item in the entry, and you type in an asterisk. And all you have to do is type in one single asterisk and hit the enter key on your keyboard. And as you can see, it will automatically calculate the remaining balance to be credited or debited for you. So instead of having to take the time and the effort to do that math of the shares times the value by hand, all we had to do is type in the asterisk, hit the enter key, and the SAP system, in a matter of seconds, calculated that the credit is worth $400,000. So you can see here, after we hit enter, the full name of the account, the additional paid in capital account, has of course been auto-populated in, as well as the full value of the amount. So to confirm this entry, and this is always the last step that we want to take before we save this entry into the SAP system, is we want to navigate to the amount information section. And this will show us and kind of have the final approval that this account, that the debits match the credits in terms of their value. And we can see here that the total debit amount is $500,000. And now that we've entered our balancing credits of our common stock and additional paid-in capital accounts, our total credit balance is also $500,000. And it's signified within the system that this account balances, the debits and the credits match up by this green light. Before it was red, and that signified that this account did not balance. But now that it's in the green, the system is giving us a go-ahead and a clearance to be able to successfully post this entry into the database. So if we review, we have our document date, we have our reference of financing because this transaction has to do with the impact of cash and its influence from the sale of common stock. We have all of our accounts that we need and that are impacted by the transaction, as well as their debits or credits and their amounts. And the balance fully adds up to 0. The debits match the credits. We can go ahead up top and simulate this entry first before we save it to be able to just make sure that everything looks as it should and that there aren't any anomalies that we should go back and check up on before we save this into the system. So if we navigate up top to the menu bar, we can find the simulate icon, which is denoted by this little abacus. And we can go ahead and click on this once. And what will happen is we will get a more SAP database-oriented view of this entry as if it were already saved into the system. And this gives us just a summary of the data that we entered. You can still see we have our document date as well as our company code, and we have our period and fiscal year here to signify that it was posted in the 5th period of the year 2020, which of course is May. And if we move to the bottom, we can see our 3 different line items, which have our accounts, both the numbers and the names, as well as the amounts. So from this screen, we can confirm that everything is exactly as we want it and it's correct. We can go ahead and post this and save it into the SAP database. So if you navigate to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you will see a blue post icon. And this is the icon that we will always click on to save all of these entries into the SAP system. So we navigate down and we go ahead and click on the post document icon. And it will alert us with a confirmation message to notify that the entry was saved into the system. And it will tell us that document followed by a document number was posted in the company code US00. And if you think about this, it makes sense. We are using the company code US00. We're using our GBI ledger to post these documents. And a document is the word that is used here by the SAP system to signify that this entry did in fact hit the ledger. Later on, as we go through the sales and procurement processes in future videos, you'll pick up that you get an array of different confirmation messages by the SAP system throughout those processes. But every time the word document is used, that is used to signify that there was an entry that has been made to the SAP system. So in this instance of this direct posting session, because we are directly posting these entries into the SAP General Ledger, we will always be met with the confirmation message that reads, "A document has been posted." Now, because we're entering all of these 5 accounting entries all at once into the SAP General Ledger, we can stay in the same FB50 enter GL account document transaction. There's no need to return back to SAP standard menu and navigate to a new transaction because we'll be using the same one. So if we move on to our second accounting entry, our second transaction, this one will be regarding the purchase of inventory on account. Now, because Global Bike Incorporated is a wholesaler of bicycles and bicycle accessories, they routinely need to purchase more inventory from their suppliers in order to have enough on hand to sell to their customers. So, in this transaction, Global Bike Incorporated went out and purchased $45,000 worth of bicycles from their supplier. Now, GBI didn't have $45,000 on hand in cash to be able to pay for these bicycles at the time of the purchase. So instead, we paid, or GBI paid, on account. And this will be taken out in the form of an accounts payable that will later need to make payment to the supplier. So, per usual, the first thing that we always need to do for any entry is to enter in the document date. So, for our document date, it is, of course, the current date, which in my case is May 19th, 2020. And once we have that entered, we can navigate down to our reference field. Now, if we think about this, there is no cash that is being impacted by this transaction. We're making this purchase on account, and thusly, we're using credit instead of cash to buy inventory. And because that cash account is not impacted by this transaction, we do not need to enter in a reference. So now that we have our header details completely entered, we can head on to the bottom portion of the screen and enter in the account-specific information for this entry. So if we select our first line item under our GL account field, we can once again click on our magnifying glass icon to bring up our chart of accounts search and display all values to search the ledger in the case that you don't have the favorites list set up. And what we'll want to do here is, of course, find the account that is being debited by this transaction. Now, in this case, because we are purchasing bicycles on account, we'll be increasing our inventory bicycles account. Now, say that we don't know what account number this bicycle inventory account is. So in that case, we're brought up to our GL account number in company code search window. We have our company code populated, but we don't know what to enter in as the search criteria in the GL account field. If we don't know, we don't need to necessarily enter anything, but instead you can leave the field blank and hit the enter key on your keyboard, and you will be brought up to a full view of the chart of accounts within the SAP database, within the company code US00. So as you can see, this chart of accounts is very, very bulky, which makes sense because it contains every single account. You can see all of the different cash accounts that are independent per user identifier here. So we know that we're not going to find it in the ones. We're not going to find our bicycle inventory account because the only accounts in the ones are the cash accounts. So moving up or down chronologically to the next number, we will take a look at the accounts that start with 2 and see if we can find our inventory bicycles account here. And thankfully, it starts with a 2. We can find our inventory bicycles account right in the middle of the screen. And the account number is 200-600. So once we have found that account, we can go ahead and double click on inventory bicycles, and that will populate the account number in our document entry screen. Now moving from left to right, we know that the normal balance of any inventory account is a debit, and through this transaction, we're increasing the amount of bicycles we have in inventory from the purchase. So we'll want to debit our inventory bicycles account. So from the D/C column, we click the drop down and select our debit. And now we have to enter the amount of the debit, which per this transaction is $45,000. So we can go ahead and enter that in to our amount field. And now that we have the GL account number for our inventory bicycles account, as well as a debit for $45,000. We can go ahead and hit the Enter key on our keyboard, and that information will be registered within the SAP system. You'll see that the full account name of Inventory Bicycles appears in the short text field, and the amount information section changes to reflect the debit entry that has just been made. So we can see that our total debit balance is $45,000, which is from the debit to the Inventory Bicycles account. But we still have a credit balance of 0 because we have not yet entered the balance in credit. And that's, of course, signified by the red light in the amount information section. Now, to get this entry to balance, we, of course, need to enter in the related credit portion of this entry. And because we are purchasing inventory on account, we are, of course, going to be crediting an accounts payable because the normal balance of an accounts payable account is the credit, and we're increasing the balance of the payables. We are, of course, going to credit the accounts payable account. So if we navigate to our next line item under the GL account field and click the magnifying glass icon, if you have your favorites list set up, you can, of course, click on the accounts payable account from the list, but if not, we can always search for it in our GL account number in company code search. And once again, perhaps we don't know necessarily the numerical value that any accounts payable account starts with. So we can go ahead, leave our GL account field blank, and as long as we have our correct company code entered, we can hit our Enter key, and we once again will be brought to just the full chart of accounts. So taking off from last time when we searched, we can remember that only cash accounts start with 1. So we automatically can rule out all of the accounts starting with a 1 because they're all cash accounts. So now if we go down to the 2s where we found our Inventory Bicycles account, we can take a look and see that SAP has coded all of the accounts starting with 2 as those that are perhaps inventory, some receivables, some fixed assets that you can see here, such as vehicles, office furniture, and so on. So if we try the next number down, which are the 3s, we can take a look through this list, and we can see that we have some of our payables here, and they all start with the number 3. So out of all of these different payables accounts that we have in our chart, the one we're looking for is payables miscellaneous. We're not assigning this purchase to anything with regard to income taxes, interest, commissions, so forth. So we will be crediting the payables miscellaneous account. Then the account number is 300-200, and once we found it, we can go ahead and double click to populate that into our document entry screen. And just as before, we now need to enter in the debit or the credit and the amount for that debit or credit. So as I had noted, because we're increasing this payables account from this purchase, and the normal balance of the payables account is a credit, from the D/C column, we're going to select our credit option. And once again here, because this is the last line item in this entry, to balance this out and auto-calculate our value, all we have to do is enter in an asterisk into the amount field and hit the Enter key on our keyboard, and the SAP system will automatically calculate the balancing credit for us. If we check in our account information section on the right-hand side of the screen, which is what we always do after we are done entering an entry, we can find that our total debits equal $45,000 and our total credits also equal $45,000. This entry is good to be saved into the system and good to be posted, which is of course signified by our green light in the amount information section. So if we go back and review, we have the correct document date. We do not have a reference entered, but that's okay because this account is not impacting, or this entry is not impacting the cash account at all. So there's no need for a reference. We have the debit to our inventory bicycles account and the matching credit to our payables miscellaneous. And of course, our entry balances between debits and credits. So we can navigate to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen and click on the post icon to save this into the SAP system. And just as before, the SAP system will alert you with a confirmation message that the entry was saved by presenting you with a document number that you can use to reference that specific entry if you wanted to go back in the future and check out that entry as it is saved in the SAP database. The third entry we'll be entering into the SAP General Ledger is to record some of the various expenses that GBI has incurred during the current period and is an example of a larger compound entry. Instead of having to enter individual entries for each different expense, we can group all of the entries together into one single entry that we can post. And this is easier to be able to group everything together and to give us a grand total of how much these different expenses cost. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is, of course, add in our document date, which is always the current date. So for my case, it is May 19th, 2020. And the next thing down is we're going to take a look if we need to enter in a reference. Now, because we're paying these different expenses in cash, the cash account is, of course, being impacted, and thusly we need a reference. Now, if we think through the three different classifications of references, we start with operating. Now, operating, as I noted before, is the reference used when cash is used to either pay or cash is received from the normal operations of the business. So because we're paying off expenses that we've incurred in our normal operations at GBI, this reference we would use in this transaction would be operating. So in our reference field, we can go ahead and type in operating to signify the operating transaction. And now we can go down to the bottom portion of the screen and begin to enter in our account-specific information. Now, because this is a compound entry, it is going to impact several different accounts at once. We're entering 5 different expenses that we've incurred during the current period as GBI, and we're paying all of them off with cash at once. So just as a review of the expenses, the first expense that we've incurred as GBI is supplies expense for $500. Throughout this period, some of the office supplies have been depleted by the staff, and thusly we needed to spend $500 to replenish those supplies. The next thing we need to pay off is utilities expense, and that is worth $15,000. Of course, for our office and our factory at GBI, we need to keep the water running and we need to keep the lights on. And we incurred a utilities expense of $15,000 by doing so. Up next, we have a rent expense of $15,000 as well. And that, of course, is to pay the rent that we owe the landlord on our office space as well as our factory space. The next expense that we have is payroll expense for our office employees, and that is worth $3,840. This payroll expense was incurred for some of our sales clerk staff, our purchasing clerk staff, and some of our day-to-day operations people. Our last expense that we've incurred for this period is payroll expense, but this time for administrators. And this comes at the cost of $960. This payroll expense was used to pay the managers, maybe the production line managers, the office managers, and some of our upper tier administrators for the period. So we'll need to make sure that we take care of that and get that $960 off of our payroll. And of course, we'll be paying all of these expenses off today in cash, hence why we need the reference of operating. Now we can go ahead and enter in the individual accounts that are being impacted by this transaction. And naturally, we are going to start by entering the accounts that are to be debited. Because the expense accounts, which are being increased by this transaction, have a normal balance of a debit, we will enter those 5 different expense accounts in first before we enter in the cash. So if we navigate to our GL account field in our first line item, we can go ahead and click in the field and in our magnifying glass icon. And if we have our favorites menu activated, we can go ahead and select our first expense, which is supplies expense from our favorites list. But if not, we can always go back to our GL account number in company code search and search for it that way. Now, we know, based on the SAP codified account system in the chart of accounts, that all expense accounts begin with the number 7. We don't know the preceding 5 digits, but we know that if we're looking for any particular expense account, it's going to start with a 7. So in our GL account field, we can go ahead and similarly to how we searched for common stock and additional paid-in capital, we can type in 7 and then an asterisk. And after we have our search criteria in and our company code of US00, we can go ahead and hit the enter key on our keyboard. And this will bring us up with all of the different accounts in the SAP system that begin with 7. So as you can see here, there are various different expense accounts from everything for labor expense. Here are our payroll expenses, maybe some taxes, some shipping expense. But the one that we're looking for, the expense account that we're going to be debiting first is, of course, supplies expense for those office supplies. So if we look here, our supplies expense, which is account number 740000, once we find that, we can go ahead and double click on it to populate it in our document entry screen. And because we are increasing the amount in the supplies expense account, and we know that the normal balance is a debit, we go from left to right into our D/C column and select a debit. And in our amount column, we know that in the current period, we incurred supplies expense worth $500. So in this field, we can go ahead and type in 500 and hit the enter key to register that into our SAP system. And once this registers, you will see very similarly to all of the other accounts in the entries that we made, the account name will populate, as will the amount information, the full $500 value, as well as the total debit value of $500. So as I just noted, the full account name appeared, and the amount information section changed to reflect the total debit balance of $500, but the total credit balance of $0. And of course, that gives us a red light to signify that this entry is not yet ready to be posted. So moving on right down the line, we will enter the next expense account to be debited, which is our utilities expense account, which will be debited for $15,000. And that, of course, was incurred by keeping the lights and water on in our GBI facilities. So if we navigate down to our GL account field in our next line item down under supplies expense, we can click our gray magnifying glass icon, and in our GL account number in company code search box, We can use the same search criteria that we used for the supplies expense account. We know that all expense accounts start with a 7, and by using the number 7 followed by an asterisk, we can limit the search results to only the accounts in our SAP chart of accounts that start with a 7. So once we have our GL account search criteria in, as well as our company code, we can go ahead and hit the Enter key on our keyboard, and we'll be brought up the search results of all of the accounts within our SAP chart of accounts that start with the number 7. So if we take a glance down this list that appears of various expense accounts, we scroll all the way to the bottom, and we can find that the utilities expense account is listed here with the number 741500. So once we've located the utilities expense in the chart of accounts, we can go ahead and double click that to populate it into our document entry screen. And of course, similarly to any expense account, because we are increasing our utilities expense from keeping the water and the electricity on, we will be debiting our utilities expense account because the debit is the normal balance. So if we navigate over to the D/C column, we can select the debit option, and in the amount, because our utilities expense came to a total of $15,000, we will enter in the total of $15,000. Once we have our account number for our utilities expense account, as well as the selection of a debit for $15,000, we can go ahead and hit the Enter key on our keyboard, and it will populate all of the information, including the account name, the amount, and as you can see, the amount information section in the right-hand side of the screen updates to reflect a new total debit balance. Instead of just 500, it's now 15,500 because it's adding the balances of the supplies expense account and the utilities expense account together. But you can see there's still a red light, and that's because there's still no balancing credit to this entry. So we'll just have to keep going and continue to add our various expenses in. So our next expense to be added is our rent expense, which of course was incurred from paying our landlord for the rent for our plant and our office space. So if we navigate to the next line item under the GL account field, click the gray magnifying glass, head into our GL account number in company code search criteria, and use that same criteria of the 7 and the asterisk. Once we have our company code and our criteria entered, we can hit the Enter key on our keyboard to once again bring up this chart of accounts. And we can find rent expense located towards the top with the account number of 740300. And once you navigate that, you can go ahead and double click on it to populate it into the document entry screen. Similar to the others, because the normal balance for the expense account is the debit, we're going to select the debit from our D/C column, and we're going to enter in the value of our rent expense for this period, which was also $15,000. Once we have our account number, our debit, and our amount plugged in, we can once again hit the Enter key on our keyboard, and this information will be registered into the system. You can see our rent expense account name comes up, and our total debit amount updates in our amount information section. Now, the second to the last expense that we're going to be entering into this compound entry is the debit to the payroll expense for our office employees. And of course, this was incurred by paying our office employees at GBI for the period, and it comes at the cost of $3,840. So if we navigate down to the GL account field in the next line item and click the gray magnifying glass icon, and we navigate to the GL account number in company code search criteria. We once again enter that same criteria of 7 and an asterisk. And once we have our company code and search criteria entered, we hit the enter key, and we're brought to our general list of our expense accounts. And we can find our payroll expense for our office employees is located towards the top here in the center. And it's payroll expense office, and the account number is 740500. So once you've located that, you can go ahead and double click to select our payroll expense for our office and populate that into our document entry screen. Because this expense for payroll is being increased, we are going to debit this expense account for a total of $3,840. So once we have our 3 pieces of account information plugged in, we can hit the enter key on our keyboard, and this will populate our information. We have our account number, the payroll expense for the office, and our total, which also updates our total debit in our amount information section. So the last expense that we'll need to enter is our payroll expense, but this time for our administrators. This is a debit to our administrative payroll expense of $960, and this comes from, of course, paying our GBI administrators for the period. So if we navigate down to our next line item, GL account field, click the gray magnifying glass icon, and we navigate to the same search using the same criteria, but 7 and then an asterisk. Once all of our information is plugged in, we can hit the enter key on our keyboard. And we can find that our payroll expense administrative is located right under our office payroll expense. And this time the account number is 740600. So once we've navigated to our payroll expense administrative, we can double click to populate it into our document entry window. Here again, this expense account is being increased, and thusly we will be debiting it. And the total value of payroll expense for our administrators for the period was $960. So once we have that typed in, we can go ahead and hit the enter key on our keyboard. And once again, it populates the full name of the account, the full amount of the debit, and once again, updates the total debit value in our amount information section. Now, this $35,300 debit here is the total value of all of the 5 expenses that we've entered thus far. These are all the expenses that GBI has incurred in the period, and now we must pay off this total of $35,300 with cash, which is why we used the operating reference. So if we navigate down to our GL account section, our next line item, this time we'll once again be entering in our cash account. So if you haven't memorized this cash account by now, the number, we can always search for it using our 3-digit identifier. So we navigate to our GL account number in company code. And in the search box, instead of typing in that 7 and an asterisk, we're going to use the same method we used in the first entry, which is to type in the asterisk first, and then our 3-digit identifier. So in my case, it is 089. Once we have our identifier in, as criteria and our company code, we can go ahead and hit the enter key on our keyboard, and this will present us with our individual cash account. And once we have that cash account on the screen, we can of course double click to populate it. And here again, we're really going to show the usefulness of typing in the asterisk in the amount field to summate all of the debits that we've entered thus far. Now, what's nice about this is, again, considering this is the last line item that we're going to be entering in this posting, we don't even have to enter in a debit or a credit in the D/C column. If we type in the asterisk in the amount column and hit the enter key, the SAP system is intuitive enough to automatically assume that you are going to be entering the balancing credit. So if we skip over the D/C column and in the amount field, we simply type in an asterisk and hit the enter key, it will automatically credit our cash account for the total balance of $35,300. And here you can even see the usefulness more so than when we had used this feature previously, because this is a larger compound entry. Because there are more accounts and values being added up, there's a larger room for human error to occur. And by using this SAP feature, it eliminates all of that human error possibility and really shows kind of the beauty of the digitalization of accounting software, or the debits and the credits of accounting, and shows why systems like SAP are so widely used and accepted in the business world. So as we do a final check of this entry, we make sure that we have all 5 of our expense accounts debited here. We have our supplies expense, utilities, our rent, both of our payrolls, and we have our balancing credit to our cash account. And we can tell that it's balanced out and the account is good to, or the entry is good to be posted, because we have a green light in the amount information section. And we can see that our total debits of $35,300 match our total credits of $35,300. And we have our document date up here of the current date, as well as our reference of operating. And once we've gone through and reviewed everything that we see, we can go ahead and post this to the SAP General Ledger by navigating to the bottom right-hand corner and clicking the blue post icon. And once again, we will get a successful confirmation message from the SAP system that tells us that a document was posted into our company code. Now on to the 4th entry that we'll be posting into the SAP General Ledger. We will be recording a sales transaction for GBI. Now in this transaction, because the International Bike Race is approaching, which is a world-renowned event, these bicyclists from around the globe are purchasing these brand new bikes to use in the event. The German national biking team, who has a great relationship with GBI and has always contracted with them to buy bikes, has reached out and expressed that they would like to buy $88,000 worth of DXTR Deluxe touring bikes to supply the German bike riders with. They'll be paying for this transaction in cash. And because of the positive relationship that GBI has with the German national biking team, they've also agreed to pay the shipping costs of $2,400 for the team. And GBI will be paying those shipping expenses in cash. So here's another opportunity to see a compound entry within the SAP system. So per usual, the first thing we need to do is to enter in a document date for this transaction, which is always the current date, May 19th in my case. And because cash is being impacted by this transaction, we need a reference. And if we think back to our operating, investing, and financing, we would consider this an operating reference, because selling these bikes is what we're in business to do at GBI. So the money that's coming in from this sale in cash would be considered an operating reference. So we can navigate to the reference field and type in our operating reference. Good. And now that we have in our document date and our reference of operating, we can head on to the bottom portion of the screen and type in the account-specific information of the accounts that pertain to this entry. Now, the first portion of this entry that we'll be recording is the sales portion, which, of course, if you remember from your accounting curriculum, when you receive cash in a sale, you're going to be debiting the cash account and crediting the sales revenue account. So we'll be entering the debit to our cash account first. And of course, that debit is for $88,000 because that is the full amount of the sale of our DXTR deluxe touring bikes to the German national biking team. So if we navigate to our first line item under our GL account field and click the gray magnifying glass icon, we can navigate to our GL account number and company code search and use our 3-digit identifier preceded by an asterisk to search our chart of accounts for our cash account. So of course you enter the asterisk and your 3-digit identifier number, which in my case is 089. Once we have our criteria entered and our company code in as well, we can hit the enter key on our keyboard. And of course, we are presented with our individual cash account. So we can double click on that cash account to populate it in our document entry screen. And next, we'll navigate over to the D/C column. And because the normal balance of the cash account is a debit, and the cash account is being increased by this transaction, we will select the debit option. And the full amount of the sale that we're receiving in cash is $88,000. So we can enter that into the amount field. Once we have those 3 pieces of information in, we can go ahead and hit the enter key on our keyboard. And all 3 of those things will register in the SAP system. And we're brought with our full cash account name, as well as the $88,000 value. And that is updated in the amount information section. There's a total debit of $88,000. So the balancing credit that we need, of course, is the increase to the sales revenue account. Because the normal balance of the sales revenue account is a credit and it's being increased by this sale of DXTR Deluxe Touring Bikes, we'll need to credit our sales revenue account. So if we navigate to the next line item in the GL account field, click the magnifying glass dropdown, and in our search box, we might not know necessarily the number that our sales revenue account begins with, because up until this point, we've taken a look at the cash account, which all cash accounts start with 1. In the 2s, we saw some of the fixed assets and the inventory accounts. And we took a look at the 3s, which are some of the common stock, the additional paid-in capital, some of the payables. And we've taken a look at the 7s, which are the expense accounts. Now, instead of going through the chart of accounts and searching for it, I will tell you that in the SAP codified system that it assigns to general ledger accounts, all sales revenue accounts begin with a 6. So in our GL account field, we can go ahead and type in our number 6 and an asterisk to limit our chart of accounts down to only those that start with the number 6. Once we have our search criteria in, as well as our company code of US00, we can go ahead and hit the enter key on our keyboard, and we'll be brought up with various different revenue accounts and some other revenue deduction accounts. Now, the one that we're going to want to credit in this instance is, of course, sales revenue. We're not advertising anything. We're not making anything off of our advertisements. We're making money off of our sale of these bicycles. So our sales revenue account, which is 600001, once we've found it, we can go ahead and double click on it, and that will populate it into our document entry screen. And as of now, this is the last line item that we'll have. So instead of having to go through and type in our values manually, we can go ahead and simply use our asterisk shortcut in the amount field and hit enter, and it will balance out this entry for us. It'll populate the sales revenue account name, and in the amount information section, it will give us a green light to post this as our debits of $88,000 match our credits of $88,000. Now, if this were a normal entry that had to do with a reception of cash, we could post this right now without having to add any more parts to this entry in. But because we are selling bicycles from our inventory, we must also add an entry in that debits our cost of goods sold to Global Bike Incorporated for the value of how much it costed us to produce or procure those DXTR Deluxe Touring bikes. And the balancing credit must then be put into our inventory bicycles account because we are physically selling and removing bicycles from our GBI inventory and sending them off to the German national team. So of course we'll want to enter in the debit first, which is the debit to our cost of goods sold account. And we click in our line item and the gray magnifying glass icon. And we can again return to our GL account search screen. Now in here, because the cost of goods sold account is classified as an expense within the SAP General Ledger and the chart of accounts, we know that it starts with a 7. So if we use some of the methods that we used in some of the previous entries to find our expense accounts in the chart of accounts, we know that we can type in a 7 followed by an asterisk. And once we have our GL account criteria in, as well as our company code, we can go ahead and hit the Enter key on our keyboard. And it will bring up the very familiar list of all of our expense accounts. Now, the cost of goods sold account, thankfully for GBI, because it is so often and frequently used in different entries, it is easily identifiable as the last account in our chart of accounts. So if we scroll all the way to the bottom, we can see that our cost of goods sold account is at the very bottom and has the account number of 780000. So once we've found that account, we can double click on it to populate it into our document entry screen. And because the normal balance for the cost of goods sold account is the debit, and we are increasing our cost of goods sold account for the amount of what it costed GBI to procure these deluxe touring bikes, we will be debiting our cost of goods sold account. So we can select debit from the D/C field. And because the cost is a little bit different than the actual revenue that we make off of the sale, we'll actually be inputting $28,000 in for this debit as opposed to $88,000. And that's because we obviously at GBI want to make a profit off of the bikes that we're selling. And if we sold the bikes at the same amount that it costed us to buy them, we wouldn't be making any profit. But because there is a revenue of $88,000 off of this sale of bicycles and a cost of $28,000, we can conclude that we have a margin, a profit margin of $60,000, which is a fairly good margin to make off of a sale. So if we go ahead and hit the Enter key on our keyboard, this information will be registered into the SAP system, and we see that our cost of goods sold account name has populated here, as has the value. And you can see that in the amount information section, the amounts of total debits and credits have been updated to reflect the current status of the entry. So we can see that we have a total debit of $116,000, but still only a total credit of $88,000. And that's because we need to enter in our balancing credit entry. So because we are physically removing bicycles from GBI's inventory due to the sale to the German national biking team, that is going to be a decrease to the inventory bicycles account. Now, the normal balance of the inventory bicycles account is a debit, but because we're decreasing the inventory that we have on hand, we'll want to credit that account. So again, if we navigate to the next line item and click on our gray magnifying glass icon, we can search our chart of accounts for our inventory bicycles account. And if you remember back to an earlier entry that we did, we actually used this inventory bicycles account, and we remember that it starts with a 2. So if we plug in our 2 followed by an asterisk, and as long as we have our criteria in, as well as our company code, we can hit the enter key on our keyboard, and this will condense the ledger to only show us the results or the accounts that start with the number 2. And we can remember from before, our inventory bicycles account is number 200600. Once we've found it, we can double click on it and that will populate it into our document entry screen. And now here again is a great show of the intuition of the SAP system. And because it is the last line item, even though there are other debits and credits in this entry, all we have to do is enter in our asterisk in our amount field and hit the enter key, and it will automatically balance the entry for us. And you can see in the amount information section, our total debits match our total credits, and we have the green light to post this if we so desire. However, there is one last portion of this entry that we need to enter, and that is, of course, the payment of the shipping expense. Because we are on such good terms with the German national biking team, we agreed as GBI to take care of the shipping expense for them, so they don't need to worry about shipment all the way from Miami, Florida, in the United States, to Berlin, Germany, of course, in Europe. And so we need to enter that payment of that shipping expense onto our books as part of this compound entry. So if we navigate down to the next line item, the GL account field, we click our gray magnifying glass icon, and we find our GL account number search box. Here's where we're going to find our shipping expense. So our rule of thumb is that all of our shipping expenses, or all of our expenses rather, in the SAP system begin with the number 7. We can go ahead and type in 7 followed by an asterisk and hit the enter key. And it will once again bring up all of our different expense accounts. Now, our shipping expense, you can see it's about 2/4 or half of the way down right here, and it's account number 741000. And you want to double click on that shipping expense to select it and populate it into our account or our document entry screen. And because we're increasing that shipping expense account for $2,400, which is the cost that it takes to ship the bicycles over to Germany from Miami, we can go ahead and enter in a debit, which is the normal balance of any expense account, and a total of $2,400. Once we have those amounts in, we can, of course, hit the enter key on our keyboard, and it will update the amount shown in the amount information section. And as you can see now, we're once again thrown out of balance with our debits having more than our credits. And that's because we need to enter in the balancing credit to the cash account. Because GBI is paying the shipping expense off in cash, we're going to be decreasing the cash account, which of course is a credit. So if we navigate to our line item in our GL account, we click the gray magnifying glass icon, and in our search field, we enter in the asterisk and then our 3-digit identifier. In my case, it's 089. Once we have that identifier in and our company code, we can go ahead and hit enter. And of course, we are presented with our cash account, which we can double click to select and populate into our document entry screen. And here again, we can use our asterisk shortcut and hit the enter key, and that will balance the entire entry for us. So now just to review, before we post this entry to the SAP General Ledger, we'll want to make sure that we have all the necessary accounts. We have our debit to our cash and credit to a sales revenue. We have the related debit to our cost of goods sold and credit to our inventory bicycles. And lastly, we have the recording of the payment of the shipping expense by a debit of the shipping expense account of 2400 and the credit of the cash account of 2400. And our amount information section up here shows us that our debits match our credits, and we have the green light to be able to post this into the ledger. Our document date and our reference of operating are as they should be, and we can navigate to the post icon in the bottom right hand corner of the screen and click it to save our entry into the ledger. As you can see, we get a document was posted message from SAP to signify that it was saved successfully. Now for the final entry that we're going to post to the SAP General Ledger is the purchase of a fixed asset. Now, because GBI has really grown in size and scale and has made good progress with selling in the market, they need to be able to expand their fleet of delivery vehicles because their sales are growing and they need to be able to distribute more product to more places across the world. So to expand our delivery fleet at GBI, we're going to purchase the fixed asset of a new delivery truck. So this delivery truck has a useful life of 10 years, which is obviously more long-term than just 1 year. And that is what tells us that it is officially classified as a fixed asset. The truck is worth $80,000, and that's how much that we're going to buy the truck for, and we'll be paying off that $80,000 in cash. So the first thing we're going to do for our entry is, of course, enter in our document date, which is our current date. And then the reference, because this transaction of buying this delivery truck is impacting the cash account, we're going to need a reference. Now, if we go through our 3 different references of operating, investing, and financing, we place this in the context of an operating reference. And even though it does have to do a little bit with how we sell our product, which would be considered an operating reference, it's a fixed asset, which makes it more characteristic of an investing reference. And that reason is because we are buying this fixed asset of a delivery truck that we expect to last us for at least 10 years. That's more of a long-term approach, and it's a way of showing that we are investing in the business. So the reference is going to be investing for this entry. So once we have our document date and our reference of investing plugged into our header, we can begin to enter some of the account-specific information that is affected by this entry of purchasing a truck in cash. Now, of course, the debited account is going to be the one that we enter into this entry first. So if we navigate down to our first line item under the GL account field and click the gray magnifying glass icon, we're going to be debiting the fixed assets account. Because we are procuring this delivery truck, which is classified as a fixed asset, and adding it to our GBI fleet, we need to make sure that we record that transaction properly on our books at GBI as an increase to the fixed asset account. So if we navigate to our GL account number in company code search, we can go ahead in again, and we don't necessarily know what number our fixed asset account begins with. So as long as we have our company code entered in, we don't need to put anything into our GL account field, and instead we can just hit the enter key to get a full view of our chart of accounts. As we've discussed before, this fixed asset account wouldn't be located in the range of the ones because the ones are only the cash accounts in the system. So we know we have to start off in the accounts that begin with twos. So if we scroll down past the ones to the accounts that begin with the twos, we can begin to see that there are various different inventory accounts, like we referenced before, the inventory bicycles account, as well as some of the other prepaid assets that we have. And you can see fixed assets is located towards the bottom of this list at account number 220050. So once you found the fixed asset account, you can go ahead and double click it to populate it into our document entry screen. And now because the normal balance for a fixed asset account is the debit, and we're increasing our fixed assets because we are bringing this new delivery truck into our inventory and into our delivery fleet, we're going to be debiting our fixed asset account. So in the D/C column, you can go ahead and select the debit option. And we are going to be debiting this fixed asset account for the full value of the truck and how much we pay for the truck, which is $80,000. So in this amount field, we're going to type in 80,000. And once we have our account number, the debit or the credit, and the amount in, we can hit the enter key on our keyboard. And this will, of course, populate the fixed assets account name, as well as update the amount of the total debits in the amount information section of the screen. And as you can see, because we do not yet have the balancing credit entry, we have a total debit balance of $80,000, but a credit balance of 0, and we are not good to post, as is kind of explained by the red light icon here. So now we need to enter in the proper credit entry to balance this account out, which is a credit to cash. We're paying for this delivery truck in cash, and because the normal balance of the cash account is a debit and we're decreasing it because we're paying out cash, we're going to be crediting the cash account. So if we navigate down to the next line item under the GL account, and click on our magnifying glass search icon, we can once again go to our GL account search screen. And if you don't have your cash account number memorized by now, we can search using our asterisk and our 3-digit identifier in the GL account field. So in my case, it's 089. Once we have the asterisk and our 3-digit identifier entered in, as well as our company code, we can go ahead and hit the enter key on our keyboard, and we are shown our cash account, which we can double click on to populate it in the document entry screen. So now that we have our cash account number plugged in, because it is the last line item in this entry, we can use our asterisk shortcut trick by plugging an asterisk into the amount field and hitting enter. And you can see now that we have the balancing credit entry of the same amount of $80,000 to our cash account, and signified by the green light in the amount information section of the screen. Our total debits match our total credits of $80,000 each. And of course, that $80,000 was incurred because we are procuring a new delivery truck and we are paying $80,000 in cash. So if we review what we have entered in for this entry before we go ahead and post it, we see that we have our document date of the current date, our reference of investing, we have the debit of $80,000 to our fixed asset account, and the balancing credit entry of $80,000 to our cash account. And our amount information section is giving us the green light to go ahead and post. And so we can navigate to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen to the blue post icon and click on it. And of course, it will save into the SAP system. And we know that because the SAP system prompts us with another confirmation message that notifies that a document was posted in our general ledger. So at this point, we have successfully entered the 5 different entries of the transactions that GBI has incurred in the current period. And we are done using the Enter GL account document transaction. So from this screen, we want to navigate back to the SAP standard menu. So we can now go ahead into the reporting features of SAP and view some of the reports of the information that we just entered into the general ledger. And we can do that by navigating up to the top right-hand corner of the GL account document transaction to this exit icon. And we can click that to exit the screen. It will prompt us with a message just to confirm that all the data that we have, if any, will be lost if we exit out of our document entry transaction. Because we've already posted all 5 entries, everything has already been saved to the SAP database, so we can click on Yes to confirm that we want to exit the editing and the entering of these entries. And after clicking Yes, we're brought back to where we started at SAP Standard Menu. Now we'll transition into the second portion of our direct posting and financial reporting process and our application section, and take a look at 4 very specific financial reports that can be generated by the SAP system. Global Bike Incorporated CEO Art Vandelay has reached out to us and informed us that he would like to view the data contained within 4 different SAP reports: the General Ledger Report, the Cash Flow Statement, the Income Statement, and the Cost Center Variance Report. We'll take a look at each of these reports one at a time and analyze the information within, as well as send our analysis and the report itself as an attachment in an email to GBI CEO Art Vandelay. The first report that we'll view is the General Ledger Report. Now, what we'll get out of this and what this report will display is a summary of balances for all of the different accounts within the SAP General Ledger that have balances in them. Art wants to know from this report what the different balances of these accounts are implying for Global Bike Incorporated. So once we go in and take a look at the report, we'll consider that in our analysis and send this report off to him. So how to get into the General Ledger report? We'll want to navigate over to our T-Code Favorites menu, and we'll want to go to our second one down, which is our GL account balances. So once we're there, we can double click and it will open up the GL account balance organizational structure screen. Now, as its name implies, the organizational structure screen for the GL account balances report is where we need to input specific pieces of organizational structure in order to generate the correct report in the correct format that we're looking for. The first piece of organizational structure that we'll need to enter are the GL accounts that we wish to see balances for. If we navigate to our GL account selection section up top to the GL account fields, this is where we'll enter the criteria of the desired accounts that we wish to see the balances for. So in our first GL account field, we need to put the lower bound of our criteria. Now, we want to see balances for our entire chart of accounts, all the way from our master cash account, all the way up to our cost of goods sold account, which, if you remember from the document entry step, you'll remember that the cost of goods sold account is the last one in our chart of accounts. So in our first field, we can click in, and this is where we'll want to type in the balance of the master cash account. Now, the master cash account is a consolidated account that brings together all of the different balances of all the cash accounts that fall under it. So if you remember, every individual user in the SAP system has their own unique cash account, but this master cash account groups together the balances of all individual accounts and consolidates them into one single value. So the number for our master cash account is 1 followed by 5 zeros. So in our first GL account field, we can go ahead and type in our 1 followed by 5 zeros, which is the number for our master cash account. And now once this value comes up, we can go ahead and click anywhere else than the drop-down menu. And this is because there are several different values that may appear when you type in any given GL account number, and we want to make sure that we don't select the wrong one by accident. So after you have your 1 followed by 5 zeros typed into our first GL account field, you can go ahead and click out anywhere onto the GL account balances transaction screen. And now we need to insert the upper bound of our GL account balances report, which is, of course, going to be our cost of goods sold account. So if you navigate over to the right, next to the box where it says 2, we can go ahead and click in here, and this is where we'll enter the account number of our cost of goods sold account. And if you remember from the previous step, the account number for our cost of goods sold account is 780000. So once we have these accounts typed in, we have our lower bound of our master consolidated cash account, and we have the upper bound of our cost of goods sold account. We can once again click out and navigate to the next field down, which prompts us for the next piece of organizational structure that needs to be entered, which is the company code. Now, as we discussed earlier, the company code is, of course, the way to specify the general ledger that you're working out of in SAP. And because that we've been using a single company code this entire time, because our SAP S4 client is set up as a single company code client, we'll enter our company code of US00 in the company code field. So if we navigate down and click in the field next to company code in our GL account selection section, we can go ahead and type in our US00 company code. Now again, just as a review, we're using the US00 company code because our SAP S4 HANA client is single company code. If it were a multiple company code, this is where you would enter in your US and then a individualized 2-digit identifier to designate several different general ledgers. But again, we're acting and operating out of one single company code and thusly one single SAP general ledger. And so in the company code field, we need to put our single company code in. After entering our company code, as well as our lower and upper bounds of the GL accounts that we wish to view in our report, we've completed entering all necessary organizational structure in our GL account selection section. Now what we'll do next is navigate down to the transaction figures selection section to put in some time-sensitive information, to restrict the report to just show us information that has been entered into the SAP General Ledger in the current fiscal year. So as you can see in our transaction figures selection section, specifically in the fiscal year field, you'll see that the current fiscal year, which in my case is 2020, should be auto-defaulted in the field. The current fiscal year is the one that we need to generate the report for, and if it has been auto-populated for you, you don't need to enter anything into this section. However, if it was not auto-populated, please enter in your current fiscal year in the fiscal year field, and for my purposes it's 2020, so I would have entered 2020 in this fiscal year field if it had not already been auto-populated there. The last piece of organizational structure that needs to be entered before we can execute the generation of our general ledger report are the number of specific periods that we wish to view data from. Now, if we scroll down to the further selections section, which is directly under the transaction figures selection section, you'll see the reporting periods fields. Now what this does is it can generate a report based on the time frame of the year that you wish to view data for. For our sake, We would like to view data that has been entered for the entire year, hence why the system has auto-populated the reporting periods of 1 to 16. Now, the reason why this is 16 is the upper bound instead of a normal 12 is because the reporting periods count for 1 through 12, which are the normal 12 calendar months out of the year, and there are an additional 4 periods added on to the end to represent the 4 different quarters of the fiscal year. So if you wanted to generate maybe just a report per quarter instead of per month, you could do a reporting periods 13 to 16, and that would show you only quarterly values. But for our sake, we would like to see all of the values, both monthly and quarterly. So we can keep the 1 to 16 reporting periods as they've been auto-populated into our reporting periods fields. If they have not been auto-populated in these fields for you, you can go ahead and take a second to enter in your 1 in the first reporting periods field and 16 as the upper bound in the other reporting periods field. Now, once you have those reporting periods entered, we can scroll back up to the top and just ensure that we have all the correct data input. We have our fiscal year, we have our lower GL account bound, as well as our upper GL account bound. And of course, we have our company code of US00 entered into the company code field in order to specify the ledger that we'd like to pull this data from. And now that we've checked and reviewed and we have all necessary organizational structure entered, we can go ahead and generate this report by navigating to the bottom right-hand corner of the transaction screen to the blue execute icon and clicking on it to generate the report. After clicking the execute icon, SAP will generate our general ledger report for us. Now, if we take a look at this, we can examine very quickly some of the information that is presented to us. If we take a look at the header in the top, we can see that this report is being generated for Global Bike Incorporated, which operates out of Dallas, Texas. And it shows us that our reporting periods that are shown are between period 1 and period 16 of the fiscal year 2020. And this makes sense as this is the time-sensitive information that we entered in the organizational structure step. If we take a look at the information that has actually been generated for us here in terms of the balances, here we see the balances of all individual user-specific cash accounts. So for example, the user 002 had a debit in the period of 1 to period 16, 2020 of $588,000. They also had a credit balance of $87,700 in the same period. Now, if we scroll over to the right, it'll give us an accumulated balance column that balances the debits with the credits and gives you the full amount as the account is currently balanced at. So if we were to take our $588,000 debit and subtract our $87,700 credit from our cash account of user 002, we would get an accumulated balance for the period of $500,300. So if we scroll all the way back to the left, we can scroll down and see that there are various balances per each user-specific cash account. And this makes sense that some of these balances aren't necessarily the same, as each one of these different cash accounts represents the activities of a different individual user. It makes sense that the balances wouldn't be the same, as everyone incurs different transactions. So if we keep scrolling down, we'll want to view the balances of some of the other accounts in our chart of accounts, including our expenses, our revenues, some of our inventories. And as we can see here, now we have inventory values of our inventory bicycles account. And if we take a look, we can see that there has been quite some activity in our inventory bicycles account over the periods of 1 to 16 of 2020. You see there's a debit balance for the period of a little over $2 million, as well as a credit balance of a little over $1.2 million. And if we scroll all the way to the right, we can see that the total accumulated balance for our inventory bicycles account is $797,000. Now, one figure that Art Vandelay rather would maybe like to see in our analysis and would like to see considered is how much are we bringing in sales revenue? So if we scroll over all the way to the left, we can find our sales revenue account, which if you remember is 6 followed by 4 zeros and a 1. And we can find that the balance in our sales revenue account has a credit balance of a little over $4.5 million rather, and a debit balance of 0. And this makes sense because you never subtract out of sales revenue, and hence because its normal balance is a credit, you would only expect to find a balance in the credit side of the sales revenue account. Now that we've analyzed some of the balances that have been presented to us in our general ledger report, we'll need to send this report off to Art as an attachment, as well as write up a 3 to 4 sentence analysis of what these numbers mean. So to send this to Art, if we navigate up to the top menu bar to the More icon and click on it, and from the drop-down menu, we can click on System, over to List, and finally click on Send. And by doing this, our basic SAP emailer is brought up with room to enter in our title, our analysis, our recipient, as well as view the attached general ledger report. Now, the first thing we always want to do when we prepare an email like this to Art Vandelay is to check the attachment on the email to ensure that it is the correct report. So if we navigate up to these 3 tabs, Document Contents, Attributes, and Attachments, we'll want to click on the Attachments tab, which will contain our GL account balances report. So if we double click on this attachment, we can see that the report is formatted just as we had seen it in the prior step, and we can conclude that this is what Art will see once he opens this email. So once we've ensured that the correct report is attached, we can navigate to the top left-hand corner of the screen to the back arrow, which is located to the left of the SAP logo, and click on it, and this will bring us back to our emailer. Now we can begin to write our title and write our analysis of this report. To do that, we click back into our original Document Contents tab, and the emailer is back to where we began. Now that we've checked and ensured that the correct attachment is attached to our email, we want to make sure that Art is the recipient. So if we navigate down to the bottom portion of our screen to the recipient section, we can go ahead and click in our first field under recipient here. Now, because Art is very popular and a lot of the GBI employees email him on a regular basis, the SAP system knows Art by his first name. So all we need to do in our recipient field is simply type in Art's first name, A-R-T, and hit the Enter key, and it will auto-populate to Art Vandelay. The SAP system is intuitive, and it knows that we're trying to reach Art. So now that we've typed in our recipient, we need a catchy and eye-grabbing title for this email so that it doesn't just get sent to Art's junk folder or he glazes it over in his inbox. So to change the title, we'll have to navigate to the top title field and write in something more descriptive than simply GL account balances, which is what's written in by default. Now, because one of the most crucial skills to possess as a professional accountant are great communicative skills, I'm not going to tell you exactly what to write for the title or for your analysis. I will type in a simple title and a very simple analysis, but please know that you should be writing your own title and your own analysis that is much more descriptive than mine. Even though my analysis may only be 1 sentence, please make sure that you are typing in at least 3 to 4 sentences. and it's something that is written professionally and is very detailed and is something that the CEO would want to see. So for my title, I'm going to go ahead and delete out this GL account balances field. And all I'm going to do is type in the title of the report, which is the General Ledger Report. Now, once again, please remember that your title needs to be more descriptive than this and more eye-grabbing. I'm simply typing in General Ledger Report as a test. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to write an analysis that is very short, very concise, and non-descriptive. Please remember that your analysis, again, should be longer than mine, more descriptive, and really get into the values that are displayed in the report and what their implications are for Global Bike Incorporated. You can consider things like which accounts have the largest cumulative balances. For a company that is still in its infancy and growing, such as GBI is, what are some of the most surprising account balances and what their implications are? And are there any accounts that have abnormally large or small cumulative balances? If so, is that something that's worth noting to Art? So I'll go ahead and type in an example analysis, but yours, again, should be much longer, much more descriptive, and get into much more detail about the numbers presented in our general ledger report. Now, once we have our analysis completely written out, we can go ahead and review that we have everything needed for this email prior to sending it off. So we have our descriptive title that will catch Art's eyes when he opens up his email inbox. We have an analysis that's descriptive, 3 to 4 sentences, maybe even 5, and really gets into detail about the numbers in the general ledger report and their implications for GBI. We have Art Vandelay, the CEO, listed as the recipient of the email. And if we click over into the Attachments tab, we can see that our general ledger report is attached. So once we have all 4 of these key elements of the email, we can go ahead and send this off to Art. The way we always send an email in SAP is that we navigate to the top menu bar to the envelope icon, which is to send. All we have to do is simply click this icon once when we're ready to send, and it will be sent off to CEO Art Vandelay's SAP inbox. Now we're done with the general ledger report, and we'll want to exit back to SAP standard menu to view our next report. So just as before, we can navigate to the exit icon in the top right-hand corner of the transaction screen and click on it not once but twice in order to back all the way out. And now we're back at SAP standard menu. The second report that GBI CEO Art Vandelay has requested to view, as well as our accounting analysis, is the cash flow statement. Now, of course, the cash flow statement will show us the activities that have taken place in our individual user cash accounts. And in this cash flow statement, we can, of course, break down the activities of our own individual cash accounts by the 3 references or activities of operating, investing, and financing. So to navigate to the cash flow statement, we'll want to navigate to our next T-code favorite in our menu, which is FAGLB03 for display balances. Once we're there, we can double click on this T-code, and then we'll open up the organizational structure entry screen for our GL account balance or our cash flow statement. Once we're in our organizational structure entry screen, we see that as opposed to the general ledger report, here we only need to insert a few pieces of organizational structure. The first of which is the account number that we wish to view the balance for. Now, instead of looking at all of the different user cash accounts within the SAP chart of accounts, Art just wants to see the cash flow statement for our individual user cash account. So if we navigate to the account number field at the top of the organizational structure entry screen, here is where we'll type in the account number for our individual cash account. So because I am user 089, I will be entering the account number of my individual cash account, which of course is 100089. Now, please remember this is just my 3-digit identifier for my individual account number. Your account number for your cash account will be different, as you will have a different 3-digit identifier. Now, once we have the account number for our own individual cash account entered in the account number field, the only other piece of organizational structure that we'll need to enter is once again our company code in order to specify the general ledger that we'd like to pull data from to generate our cash flow statement. So if we navigate down to the next field, which is the company code field, and click in, here again is where we'll enter our company code of US00. Just as another review, if this were a multiple company code client as opposed to a single company code, here is where we would enter our individual company codes that were US and then a 2-digit identifier. But because we're all acting out of the same company code and this SAP S/4HANA client is set up for a single company code, we will all use US00. Now, the fiscal year is another piece of organizational structure that is needed in order to generate our cash flow statement. But the SAP system once again auto-populated the current fiscal year in the fiscal year field. This should be the case for you as well. However, if it's not, please click into the fiscal year field and enter your current fiscal year. Of course, this is to signify that we'd like to pull data from the SAP database that has been entered only in fiscal year 2020 or the current fiscal year. Now, as a review, we see that we have our own individual cash account entered in for the account number field. We have our company code of US00 entered into our company code field, and we have our current fiscal year entered into our fiscal year field. And once we have those 3 key pieces of organizational structure, we can go ahead and generate this report by navigating to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen to the blue execute icon and clicking on it to execute our cash flow statement. Now, after clicking execute, an initial report is brought up that displays the balances of our cash account for each respective period of the year. You can see that there's room for a debit balance per each period or month of the year. There's room for the credit balance. There's room for the total balance, and of course the cumulative. The difference between the balance column and the cumulative balance column is that the balance column only contains balances per month. So as you can see, in the month of April of fiscal year 2020, or the current fiscal year, we had a credit balance of $140,000, but a debit balance of $60,000. Of course, this balances out to $80,000 credit, but yet it's not carried forward into the next period under the balance column, and that's only because the balance column shows the total balance per month. Now, if you wanted to see a more cumulative balance, of course, you would go to the cumulative balance column, and this does carry forward the balance from each month. As you can see, the credit balance of $80,000 from the 4th period of the fiscal year was added together with the debit balance of $470,300 from the 5th period of the fiscal year to give us a cumulative balance of $390,300. Now, while this report is a great summary of all of the different debits and credits and balances that have happened throughout each period in the cash account, it's not quite formatted to the cash flow statement that we would like to analyze and send off to Art. The way we format this correctly takes a few different steps, but will give us a much cleaner and more concise report. If we scroll down all the way to the bottom of this grid-like report that appears, we'll want to go to the intersection of the cumulative balance column and the total row, where my mouse is hovering over. Now, if we double-click on this intersection of cumulative balance and total, this will bring us to a more detailed list of all of the individual transactions that have built up and added up to that cumulative balance. As opposed to the report that we just observed, this report gives us much more detail about each individual transaction that has gone into the cumulative balance of our cash account. As you can see, this report displays things such as the document date and when the transaction or the entry was posted to the ledger, the amount of that entry, which in this case here was $140,000 of a credit, and some other values such as posting keys, transaction types, and document numbers, which are all things that would be important for an auditor if they were to come in and check on the accuracy and the authenticity of these different transactions. To step into the role of an auditor for a brief moment, say we wanted to examine some of the details about one of these entries. If we scroll down about halfway, we can see here that there was an entry posted on 5/19 of the current fiscal year for a debit balance of $88,000. Now, if you remember back to our previous step where we actually posted these entries into the SAP General Ledger, you'll remember that we entered a sale of bicycles to the German national biking team for a total of $88,000. So I have a feeling that this is going to stem from that exact entry that we made, but I want to be sure. So if we take a look at this line item and scroll all the way over to the left to where you see these checkboxes. If we select this checkbox all the way to the left of the line item of our suspected sale to the German national biking team, we go ahead and click in the box, and to bring up a view of this specific entry, we can navigate to the top menu bar to the icon that is shaped like glasses, which says Display Document. If we click on this icon, this will bring up a overview of the entry that we've selected. Now, while this screen does give us an overview of the transaction that we've selected, in terms of it gives us the account, the company code, the amount of the entry, and some other figures regarding when the entry was created, and some assignments, some document numbers, it doesn't really give us the view of this entry that we're looking for. We'd like to see a view that is more formatted to a conventional accounting entry. So if we navigate once again back up to the top menu bar and find our mountain with the sun icon, we'll want to click on this to bring up a more conventionally formatted view of this entry, which will show us more expressly the debits, the credits, their amounts, and what accounts they affect. So if we take a look at the new report that has been generated, we can see something that looks very similar to how we originally posted this in the document entry transaction. It lists out all of the different accounts that have been impacted, including cash, sales revenue, cost of goods sold, and so on. Their full amounts designated by a debit with no minus sign, or a credit with the minus sign. It gives us our currency, as well as some of the header information, such as the document posting date, the reference of operating, our company code, our period and fiscal year, some of that time-sensitive information, and so on. Now, if we take a look at the details that are presented to us about this entry through this formatted view, we can confirm that this is, in fact, the entry we believed it to be. This was the entry that we had entered a while ago in our document entry step of the sale of DXTR deluxe touring bikes to the German national biking team. As you can remember, here is that revenue amount of $88,000 that we made off of the sale, as well as the cost to us, which resulted in a debit to cost of goods sold and a credit to our inventory bicycles of $28,000. And you even remember that shipping expense that we agreed to pay for the bikes of $2,400. That's all presented here, and as the auditor, we can confirm that this is the entry that was in fact posted. All the amounts match up, all the accounts and their account numbers match up. Now, furthermore, if we wanted to take a step deeper, drill down, and look at the details pertaining to the user who entered this account into the SAP General Ledger, we can use another auditing function that will show us that information. If we navigate one final time to the top menu bar to the hat icon and click on this, it will present us with a brief report in a window that gives us some details pertaining to the specific user that entered this entry into the SAP General Ledger. Now, if we were to examine some of the details that are presented to us in this little audit report, we can take a look at the user identifier of the user who entered this entry in, which was learn-089, which of course makes sense because this entry is located within my individual cash account, and thusly I'm the one who entered this entry in, of course, in an earlier step. It gives you the date that it was entered, which was 5/19, which again makes sense. That's the date that we entered our sale of DXTR Deluxe Touring Bikes in. It gives you the transaction within the SAP system that this entry was recorded in, which of course is FB50. That was the transaction code that we used to enter in our various accounting entries. And it even gives you the time of entry. At what point in the day did you or did the user enter this entry into the system? As you can see, this provides various different details that would be very important to an auditor to make sure that the right user was entering in these transactions. So once we're done with this little auditing report, we can close it out by navigating to the bottom toolbar of the window to the green checkmark icon and clicking on this, and it will close our little window. Now, before returning to our original cash flow statement, there's one more thing that we would like to understand to get a better grasp of how these entries are posted within the system. And that is, what does the PK and the numbers within the PK column stand for? PK stands for posting keys, which is more of a European accounting or IFRS accounting concept that specifies not only that an account is either debited or credited, or what kind of specific debit or credit that is being made to the account. So to get a list and a better understanding of the different posting keys found throughout the SAP system, we can click in any one of these values under our posting keys column and click on the little box icon that appears. Now what happens is the SAP system gives us a window that has all of the different posting keys throughout the system, as well as a brief description. So as you can see, it goes into specific details about what kind of debit or credit that the posting key represents, such as maybe an outgoing payment or an expense. But if we wanted to check on posting key 40 perhaps, because this was the type of debit that was made to the cash account, we can scroll all the way down to posting key 40 and see that it stands for a debit entry. And of course, this makes sense because we are creating an entry that debits the cash account. So once we've analyzed some of the different posting keys in the system and have gotten a little bit better understanding of what they mean, we can navigate to the top right-hand corner of this posting key window to the close icon and click on it. And now to return back to our cash flow statement, we can navigate once more over to the back arrow located to the left of the SAP logo and click on it once. And we're back at our cash flow statement basic screen. Now that we're back at our general cash flow statement screen, there are a few more things that we need to do to format this statement correctly. As you can see, it still gives us a lot of good information pertaining to all of the different entries found in the cash account that have been made during the current period. But you can also see that if we scroll over, there are several fields that are empty, do not possess any information in them at all. So when we send this to Art, We don't want to have all of these empty fields. They don't offer any information, and they're not needed in the grand scheme of what Art's looking for. So in order to format this correctly, we need to change the layout of this report. So the first thing we can do is to go over to the left-hand side of the screen to where we checked our box next to our entry. And just to make sure we're bringing up the entries, all of the total entries here instead of just one, we can click this to unselect our entry for $88,000. The next thing we'll need to do in order to properly format this report is navigate to the top menu bar to find the Select Layout icon. Now, although there are several different icons up here, the ones that we're looking for are formatted as grids. As you can see here, we have Change Layout, Select Layout, and Save Layout. If you can't see these on your top menu bar, you may want to make sure that your SAP transaction screen is fully maximized. Because sometimes when it isn't maximized and only part of the screen is showing, you may not get all of these icons displayed. If you maximize your window and you still see that you don't have these icons, they're always located under the More menu, as you can see here. So if we click out of the More menu, we'll need to navigate to our Select Layout icon, which looks like a set of boxes with a sun. So once we navigate there on the top menu bar, we can go ahead and click on this icon to select our layout. Now the window that appears presents us with all the different layouts that have been programmed into the SAP system. All of these give us different views of the same information, but the one that's going to give us what we need to send to Art is the first one, which is Layout Starhawk. And as you can see, this makes sense because the layout description says that this is the layout for the cash flow report or cash flow statement. So once we have this screen up and we've navigated to our Starhawk layout, we can double click on it and it will get rid of all of the redundant or empty fields in the report to give us only the key information that we need to include in our analysis and that will be sent off to GBI CEO Art Vandelay. Now, even though this formatted version of the report is much better and much cleaner than the previous version that we had, we can condense it even further to show Art just the totals of the balances for each individual reference. Because in essence, that's what a cash flow statement is. We're showing the actions or the impacts on the cash account for each reference of operating, financing, and investing. So to do this and to condense it even further, we can navigate to the header tab of our reference column here, and we'll want to click on this just once. And you can tell if you've clicked on it once because it will change color from its light blue to almost to a white. And this is showing us that it is indeed selected the way we want. And now we have to subtotal these values up. So instead of just having values for several values for different references, as you can see, we have a couple different for operating, and we have one financing and one investing. If we click on the reference tab and we navigate to the top menu bar, we'll want to find the subtotal icon, which is this double sigma icon with the slash dividing them. So once we navigate to this subtotal icon and we have our reference tab selected, we can go ahead and click, and it will give us subtotals for each individual reference. These subtotals are designated by the gold rows here, and you can see it gives us a total for our financing reference, a total for our investing reference, and a total for our operating reference. And it still gives us the total cumulative balance of the cash flow below. But we can condense this even further to show just the individual totals, which in the end is just what Art wants to see and what we can use in our analysis. So to do this, we need to click on the reference tab once more, just one time, so it changes colors from its blue to more of a white. And we need to navigate to the top menu bar to the More icon and find our Collapse option. The Collapse icon might be displayed on your top menu bar depending on the size of your screen, but if it isn't, it will be displayed here in the More drop-down menu. So once we've found and navigated our Collapse icon, we can go ahead and click on it. And now this will give us just the subtotals per each individual reference. So now we have our total of 500,000 for our financing reference. We have a credit of $80,000 during the period for our investing reference. And we have a credit of $29,700 for our operating reference. And the grand cumulative total of our cash account still holds up in the bottom gold row as seen here. Now, as I had noted before in the general ledger report, the balances that we expect to find per each individual cash account will vary from one another. And this is because each individual user may encounter different transactions throughout the period. So while you may see these totals for my individual cash account for each reference, yours may be different, and that's perfectly fine. Your user may have encountered a series of different transactions for different amounts through the period. So now that we've formatted our cash flow statement the way that we'd like, it's time to send this off to GBI CEO Art Vandelay, complete with an attached analysis. So just as we had sent our general ledger report, we can navigate to the top menu bar to our More icon and click the drop down to open our menu. Once again, we navigate to our System option, down to List, and finally, we can navigate over to Send and click on it to bring up our SAP emailer. Now, in this SAP emailer that appears, we will follow the same procedure that we had used in the general ledger report, which was a title, an eye-catching and descriptive title, a very descriptive and detailed 3 to 4, maybe 5 sentence analysis of the numbers found in our cash flow statement, as well as their implications for the business. We'll want Art Vandelay as the recipient, and we'll always want to check that we have the proper statement or report attached to the email. Always, as our first step of sending these emails to Art Vandelay, we'll want to check the attachment on the email to make sure that it's the correct report and that it's formatted the way that we want Art to see it. So if we navigate to our Attachments tab and click on it, we can see that the report that is attached is the correct cash flow statement. If we double click on this attachment, we can go ahead and see that it is formatted exactly the way that we set it up using our Starhawk cash flow statement format, and that it will present Art, once he opens it, with just the grand totals in the cash account for each of the 3 references throughout the period. So once we've confirmed that this report is formatted the correct way, we can navigate up to the back arrow located to the left of the SAP icon to return to our basic SAP emailer. Now that we've confirmed the correct attachment is on this email, we can begin to add the recipient, the title, and the analysis to our email. If we navigate back to the Document Contents tab and click on it, it will open up where we can enter our analysis. And of course, our next step is adding Art Vandelay as the recipient to the email. Just as before, we navigate to the Recipient section of the SAP emailer and click in the first line item in our recipient field. And just as before, we can type in Art's first name and hit the Enter key on our keyboard, and the SAP system will automatically know that we're trying to email Art Vandelay. And now we'll want to go up to the title and give this email a more descriptive title than what is defaulted. Now, just as before, this is where you will need to use your communication skills, your creativity, to give this email an eye-catching and a descriptive title so that Art will instantly know what he's opening once he sees it in his inbox. The title that I will give my email is just an example, and yours should be more detailed and more eye-catching. So I've given my email the example title of cash flow statement attached. Yours should be more detailed, more descriptive. But now, once we have our title, we can begin to write our analysis. Here again, I will write an example analysis that is simple one sentence and informs Art of what is attached to the email. But yours should be 3 to 4, maybe 5 sentences, and discuss things regarding the cash flow statement, such as which of the three references of operating, investing, or financing has the largest balance, and why is that? What do the balances for each of the references in our report mean for GBI? What are their implications, and what could they present for the future? And based off of the balances given for each reference in our cash flow statement, what conclusions regarding the performance of GBI could you discuss and state to Art? So I'll go ahead and type my analysis, and you can take some time to analyze the report and form your own 3 to 4, maybe 5 sentence analysis discussing the aforementioned points. So now that we've completely finished writing our analysis, we can go back and review our email to ensure that we have the 4 key components that are the title, the analysis, the recipient, and the attachment. And once we confirm that we have all 4 components, we can send this off to Art. So we have our descriptive and eye-grabbing title that will appear in Art's inbox. We have a thorough and detailed analysis of the numbers contained within the cash flow statement. We have Art Vandelay listed as our recipient. And of course, if we click on the Attachments tab, we can see that we have the cash flow statement attached. So from here, just as we had done with the General Ledger report, we can navigate up to the top menu bar to the envelope icon and click on it to send it off to Art Vandelay. And now that we're done analyzing the cash flow statement, we'll need to return to SAP Standard Menu to proceed on in our direct posting and financial reporting process and view our next report. If we navigate on the top menu bar to the far right to the exit icon, we can click this until we return back to SAP Standard Menu, and now we're ready to go on and view our next report. The next report that GBI CEO Art Vandelay has requested is the income statement. He would like to see how GBI's profits are doing after we take all gross revenues and subtract out all of the different expenses and costs incurred throughout the period. If we navigate over to our T-Codes Favorites menu and find our third report down, which is the Financial Statements report, we can go ahead and double click, and this will present us with our organizational structure entry screen. Now, as you can see, the organizational structure entry screen for the income statement looks very similar to that of the General Ledger report. We'll need to enter in some structure such as the lower and upper bounds of the accounts that we wish to view data for, the company code that we wish to designate the general ledger that the data should be pulled from, and some other specifics regarding the time of the postings and how the report is to be formatted. So the first thing we'll want to do is navigate to the GL account fields and insert the lower and upper bounds of the accounts we wish to see. So as opposed to putting in the master cash account as the lower bound, as we did in the general ledger report, we'll want to format this so that it is an income statement. And if you remember back to your accounting curriculum, you'll remember that the 2 items that are on the income statement are revenue accounts and expense accounts. So obviously, we'll want the lower bound of our GL account to fall at our sales revenue account. And if you remember from the document entry step, you'll remember that the account number for our sales revenue is 6 followed by 4 zeros and ends with a 1. And as you can see, that is correct because it brings it up in our auto-populated menu. However, we'll want to click out of that menu to avoid selecting any incorrect options. And now we can move to the right-hand side field of the GL account boxes. And now we'll need to enter the upper bound of the accounts that we wish to see. Now, if you remember from the previous step, you'll remember that the highest account in our chart of accounts is our cost of goods sold. And the SAP system codifies these accounts so they're all right in a row, meaning that all of the revenue accounts are in the 6 range, all of the expense accounts are in the 7 range. So you can very easily select the correct accounts to be displayed on an income statement. So here, if we click in our field, we can enter the account number of our cost of goods sold account, which, if you remember, is 780000. And once this is up, we can click anywhere outside of that auto-populated menu. And now we have completely entered the correct lower and upper bounds for our generated income statement. Now, the next thing we need to enter, of course, is our company code in order to designate the general ledger in the SAP system that we would like to pull data from. So if we navigate to our company code field, we can go ahead and click in. And once again, we're operating in a client of SAP S/4HANA that is set up as a single company code. So we can enter in our single company code of US00. And this, of course, will designate our GBI ledger. And we can click out of our auto-populated menu. After entering in our lower and upper bounds of our GL accounts, as well as our company code, we've finished entering the organizational structure needed in the GL account selection section. Now, if we scroll all the way to the bottom to our further selections section, there are a few key pieces of organizational structure that we need to enter here, as denoted by the red asterisks. The first of these pieces of organizational structure is the financial statement version. Now, this is what tells the system, according to what set of accounting standards would we like this income statement to be formatted to. For our purposes, our financial statement version is represented by the identifier GL00. So if we click in the field of financial statement version, we can go ahead and enter our identifier of GL00, which, as you can see, represents the financial statement or the income statement for Global Bike Incorporated. Once we have this typed in, we can go ahead and click out of the auto-populated menu. And we need to review all of the other fields denoted by red asterisks to make sure that they have the correct values. The reporting year should always be the current fiscal year. For my purposes, it is currently 2020, and thusly 2020 is the year that is plugged into the reporting year field. This should be auto-defaulted in for you based off of the fact that we've entered it in some of our previous reports, but if it isn't, take a second to enter your current fiscal year into the reporting year field. If we move down to the reporting periods section, we can see that once again, we want to bring up data from reporting periods 1 to 16, which of course represent the 12 months of the year, as well as the 4 different quarters of the year. Now next, we'd like to bring up a comparison year, which will always be the prior fiscal year. Now, even if there's no data in the current or the former fiscal year, we still need to enter a value into this field because the report will not be able to be generated without a comparison year. So we can type in our previous fiscal year in the comparison year field. It may already be auto-defaulted in there for you. If it isn't, please take a second to enter in the prior fiscal year. And of course, the comparison periods are held as the same. So we still want to compare all periods from 1 to 16, or the 12 months out of the year, and the 4 quarters. So the last thing we need to do is go into our list output section. And we need to select one of these 3 options between classical list, ALV grid control, and ALV tree control. This is just a formatting option, and if you select either one of these, it will give you a slightly different format. The best format, and the one that Art Vandelay prefers, is ALV grid control. So of course, it may be defaulted to classical list, but we want to click in the bullet icon to the left of ALV grid control to select that specific format. And now we'll want to review, before we click execute and generate this report, that we have all organizational structure needed to generate the correct report. If we scroll all the way back up to the top, we can see that we have our lower account bound of our sales revenue account in, as well as our upper account bound of our cost of goods sold account. We have our company code of US00 entered to specify the general ledger we'd like to pull our data from. And we have all necessary time-specific information plugged in, as well as our financial statement version, and the format of our ALV grid control. Once we have all necessary fields, we can navigate to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen to the blue execute icon and click on it to generate our report. You may be met with a small window that just gives you a few notices. This is basically just the SAP system's way of letting you know that the ALV grid control format has been applied, and this report will come out the way you want to see it. So to enter through this message, we can navigate to the bottom taskbar to the green checkmark icon and click on it to proceed into our income statement report. Once in our income statement, we can take a look at a few key aspects of this report. The first of which will be located in the header section of the report, which may be slightly condensed based on your screen size. In order to expand it to its full header and display all details, we can go ahead and hover over the bottom bar to where this double arrow icon appears, and we can click and drag down to expand the header so we can see all of the different details that are located there. This just says basic things like the reporting periods, which of course are the first period of the current fiscal year to the 16th. This tells us our amount currency, which of course is United States dollar, and gives us some other information. Once we see this, we can follow the same procedure to collapse this header back up a little bit by hovering over the bottom line and clicking and dragging up, so we get a more fuller view of the actual information located in our income statement. In examining the different account numbers and balances presented in this income statement, we can notice that everything that we need to form this income statement is present. We have our revenue account, as well as our different expense accounts, and of course our cost of goods sold. Now, if you look at the bottom in these gold banded rows, you can see that a balance is brought up that takes all of the different credits, which is the sales revenue, and subtracts out all the debits from the expenses and gives us a net profit of a little over $1.5 million. However, there are a few strange things about the way that this income statement is formatted, and the most prominent of which is the fact that cost of goods sold is at the bottom. Now, the reason this is because the SAP income statement by default is formatted to go chronologically by account number, which makes sense why our sales revenue account would be at the top as it starts with a 6, and all of our expense accounts would be beneath it because they start with 7s. However, in a US GAAP formatted income statement, the cost of goods sold account would be directly under the sales revenue, because the difference between the two would of course give us our gross profit. However, that's not the case here. It is, as can be seen, at the bottom instead of at the top under sales revenue. Now, one way to work around this is to reformat this in the SAP system. Now, this is rather complicated and takes quite some time and very specific details to be able to create an exact format. So another method of reformatting this would be to export it to an external application, the most popular of which is Microsoft Excel. Now, if you were to export this into Microsoft Excel, you could, of course, do many things to reformat it, including change around some rows and columns, get rid of any redundant or unnecessary fields that have zero balances, or show SAP specific things such as financial statement items or the SAP specific account numbers, and just leave the crucial information such as the account names and the values held within them. But Art Vandelay, for our purposes, because he is somewhat accustomed to seeing SAP reports, has expressed that having this regular SAP formatted income statement is just fine with him. So we can go ahead and instead of taking the time to export this to Microsoft Excel, we can go ahead and send it to him via the same method we used to send the other reports. So if we navigate up to the top menu bar to the More icon, we can of course drop this down to the System option. And if you see from the drop down, you'll see that List is grayed out. So this means that the way that this income statement is currently formatted, we will not be able to send it to him like this. So the way that we work around this is we have to find another icon or another menu path that allows us to send a reformatted version of the income statement and one that is compatible with the SAP emailer. So to send a more compatible format of the income statement to Art Vandelay, we'll follow a similar menu path, but not the same exact one that we used before. If we go up to the top menu bar, we can click on the More icon to expand our menu. But instead of going down to System, we'll want to go to List. And from this option here, we can of course navigate over down to the fourth option where it says Send To. And from Send To, we can select the Mail Recipient option. And once we click Mail Recipient, it will bring up our familiar SAP emailer. To follow the same process as before, the first thing that we want to do is ensure that the correct income statement is attached to our email to Art Vandelay. If we navigate to our Attachments tab and click in to view everything attached to this email, we see that there is a single financial statements attachment that we can double click on, and this will bring up a compatible version with the SAP emailer of our income statement. If we scroll down, all the same information is presented. We have our expense accounts, our cost of goods sold, we have our sales revenue account at the top, and we still have all of the account balances and our total profit at the bottom in the gold row of a little over $1.5 million. So if we navigate back up to the back icon next to the SAP logo, we can get back to the SAP emailer. And we click on the Document Contents tab to open up our analysis typing area. And of course now we need to add Art Vandelay as the recipient to the email. So if we navigate to the recipient section of the SAP emailer and click in the recipient field, we can type Art's first name and hit the Enter key on our keyboard, and it will auto-populate Art Vandelay's name. The next thing we'll want to do after adding Art as the recipient is, of course, to add a more descriptive and eye-catching title. Just as with the other reports, I will type in an example title here, but you should enter in a title that is much more detailed and gives Art a better idea of what he's going to be looking at once he opens the email in his inbox. And now that we have our title typed in, it's time to type our 3 to 4, maybe 5 sentence analysis of the numbers contained within the GBI income statement and their implications for the business. So once again, I'm going to type in just a short 1-sentence example analysis, but yours should be much more lengthy as well as detailed, descriptive, and really analytically minded, and thinking critically and explaining what the numbers in the income statement really mean for the business. Some things that you can consider in your analysis are things like what is Global Bike Incorporated's gross margin and what is their gross margin percentage? What implications do these values have for the company? And you could also look at their net margin value and net margin percentage, as well as what implications do those values have for the company. And to get even to a more in-depth expense analysis, you could take a look at the amounts listed for each expense, and you could make a statement or a conclusion to art about how GBI is performing based on those values. So I'll go ahead and type my analysis while you can type yours, and then we'll get ready to review this email and send it after we complete typing our analysis. Once we have our analysis completely written, we can review that we have the 4 key components of the email before we send it off to Art. So we take a look at the title, and we have our eye-catching descriptive title entered in. We have our 3 to 4 5-sentence analysis of the numbers found within the income statement attached and what their implications are for GBI. We have Art Vandelay listed as the recipient of the email, and if we click on our Attachments tab, we can see that we have our income statement attached to this email. So just as before, to send this off to Art's inbox, we can navigate to the top menu bar to the envelope icon and click on it to send it off to Art. Now, once we've sent the email containing our income statement, we can navigate back to SAP Standard Menu to go on to our last SAP generated report. So if we navigate to the top menu bar to the exit icon and click the icon until we return back, we'll get to SAP Standard Menu. The last report that GBI CEO Art Vandelay has requested is the Cost Center Variance Report. The Cost Center Variance Report is based much more in cost accounting than the other 3 reports have been, in that it gives us a more in-depth analysis of the different expenses that we've incurred throughout the period. It pits the budgeted values for these expenses that were planned for at the beginning of the period against the actual values of the expenses that were incurred during the period. And based on the budgeted values versus the actual values, this report will provide us what we like to call either a favorable or unfavorable variance. A favorable variance occurs when the budgeted value for a particular expense exceeds the actually incurred value of that expense over the period. This means that we budgeted for more than we actually spent, and thusly we saved a bit of money, and this creates a favorable variance. Conversely, an unfavorable variance is when the amount of cost or expense that was actually incurred during the period exceeded the amount that we budgeted for at the beginning of the period. This means that we spent more than we had planned for, and thusly we have lost a bit of money. And this creates an unfavorable variance. Now, to access the Cost Center Variance Report, we can navigate over to our T-Code Favorites menu and find our last T-code, which is our Cost Center's Actual Plan Variance. Once we've navigated to this T-code, we can go ahead and double-click, and this will open up the Organizational Structure entry screen for our Cost Center Variance Report. Now, the first piece of organizational structure that we need to enter in order to generate the correct cost center report is the controlling area. Now, even though SAP may default the controlling area of 0001, this is not the correct controlling area for our specific report. So we can click into this controlling area field and get rid of the 0001 if it is defaulted in. And in order to select from the list of controlling areas, just to get an idea of how many there are, we can click on the gray magnifying glass icon, and SAP will present us with a list of all the different controlling areas. Now, as you can see, they're broken up by GBI Europe, which controls and manages our operations in Germany. We have GBI Global, which takes a glance at all of the operations of GBI worldwide. And we also have the GBI North America controlling area. Now, because we're generating this cost center report just to view the data of our North American operations, the controlling area we'll want to select is, of course, GBI North America. So we can navigate to this controlling area and double click to select it, which should prompt SAP to populate it in our controlling area field. Now, moving on down the line, the next piece of organizational structure we'll need is the fiscal year. And of course, just as in the other reports we've generated, the fiscal year should be our current fiscal year. And SAP should auto-populate this into the fiscal year field for you. In my purposes, it's currently 2020, and hence why the fiscal year date is 2020. If it is not auto-populated in this field, you can take a second to type that in. And now this time, we'd like to view the cost center report not for periods 1 to 16. We only like to view it per month. So we have from period, which is the first period of the year. Again, SAP should default this value in. If it doesn't, you can go ahead and type 1 into the from period field. And then the upper bound, the last period that we would like to view, is period 12. We don't want to see the extra 4 quarters of the year. We only want to view these costs on a monthly basis. Again, this should be auto-populated. If it isn't, you can go ahead and enter 12 in the to period field. Finally, in our selection values section, the last thing we'll need is the plan version. Now, because SAP can generate several different types of plans, this field you could enter several different values in. But for our purposes, plan version 0 is what we're looking for, and that is the one that we will use going forward. This value should be pre-populated in the plan version field for you, but if not, you can go ahead and type in 0 into your plan version field. Now, the last pieces of organizational structure that need to be entered will be entered into the selection groups section, which is on the bottom half of the organizational structure entry screen. Now, we'll want to navigate down to our cost element group. Now, cost element is simply the SAP terminology for an expense account. Cost element is, an account where a cost is incurred, hence why we would associate expense accounts with them. So if we go down not to cost element group, but to the OR values section, this is where we can enter in individual values, or again, our lower and upper bounds of the accounts we wish to see in the cost center report. So if we click in the first field of OR values under the cost element group category, we'll want to go in and enter the first cost element or the first expense account in our chart of accounts. If you remember back to when we directly posted these entries to the SAP ledger, we saw that the first expense account in our chart of accounts was supplies expense. And the account number for supplies expense was 740000. So now that we've entered this account into our first OR values field, you can see that the auto-populated menu appears and we have supplies expense. So we can click anywhere outside of the auto-population menu. And now we'll need to enter our upper bound of the account. So this is where we're going to enter the last expense account in our chart of accounts, which, as we can remember, is our cost of goods sold account. So if we type in our second OR values to field, we can enter the number for our cost of goods sold account, which is 780000. And once again, we can confirm because this brings up our cost of goods sold account in our auto-populated menu. So now that we have all of our organizational structure that we need to generate this report entered, we review. We have the correct controlling area of North America 00. We have the current fiscal year and periods 1 through 12. We have our plan version as 0. And we have our lower bound of the account of our supplies expense, 740,000, to the upper bound of our cost of goods sold account, 780,000. We can now go ahead and generate our cost center variance report by navigating to the blue execute icon in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen and clicking on it. So as we can see, after clicking the blue execute icon, the correct cost center variance report has been generated, and there are a lot of different costing terms displayed here, broken down by cost center groups and individual cost elements. So the first thing that we'll want to take a look at in this cost center variance report are the different expenses broken down by cost center groups. So if you take a look at the Cost Center Group menu on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see several different codified types of groups. We have NAAD 1000, which is admin costs, and we have NAEX 1000 for John Davis. Now, each one of these different cost center groups is a group of expense accounts that is managed by one person. So the admin cost manager is the one who manages all the costs that fall under NAAD, which stands for North American Administrative Costs. Alternatively, we have John Davis, who is in charge of all of the expense accounts that fall under NAEX 1000. So for example, if we just wanted to view the costs that John Davis is in charge for, we can navigate to this icon on the left-hand side and click on it, and it will consolidate and show only the expense accounts that John Davis is in charge of, which is only one. It's shipping expense. Now, if we wanted to go back and view all of the accounts again, we can just simply click on Cost Center Group, and it will bring everything back to normal. Now, we can drill down even further and examine this report broken down by each individual cost element or expense account. So if we scroll down slightly to see all of the different accounts here, we can see that all of the accounts that were impacted in the entries we made earlier are displayed, with both the actual costs that have been incurred during the period for each expense, as well as the costs that were planned for that expense at the beginning of the period. So for example, if we take into account our supplies expense here, our first line item, we can see that in the period of 1 to period 12 of the current fiscal year, the actual costs incurred by the supplies expense account were $22,500. Now, when we compare that to the planned costs for supplies expense that were budgeted at the beginning of the period of $35,000, we can see that we actually incurred less costs than we did that we planned for. And that's displayed by our variances over in the right-hand side of the report. And as we analyze the variances shown, we can see that there is a credit balance of $12,500 for supplies expense. This means that because we actually incurred less costs than we planned for, we have a leftover balance of saved money of $12,500, which results in a 35.71% positive or favorable variance. This means, of course, that we saved extra money than we had planned for, and we can edit our budget for supplies expense accordingly moving forward. Now, if we wanted to see perhaps a negative effect or an unfavorable variance, we could take a look at shipping expense. Now, for periods 1 through 12 of the current fiscal year, shipping expense incurred an actual value of $93,600. Now, when we compare this to the planned cost of $70,000 that was budgeted at the beginning of the period, we see that we went $23,600 over our budgeted amount. And this means we paid out and we lost more money than we had initially planned for. You can tell that this is not a good value here because instead of having a credit sign, which means that our actual costs were less than our planned costs, it does not have a minus or credit sign and thus means we spent more than we had budgeted for. Furthermore, this is depicted by our 33.71% unfavorable variance in our variance percentage column. And that means, again, that we spent more in shipping expense during the period than we had budgeted for. Now, after we've analyzed this report a little bit, we of course want to send it off to Art Vandelay attached with a written analysis. So to do that, we can navigate up to the top menu bar to the More icon, and we can click down to our System, List, and finally click on the Send option. And this will bring up the SAP emailer. So as we usually do, our first step is to check and make sure that the Cost Center Variance Report is attached to the email that we're going to be sending to Art. So to do that, we navigate to the Attachments tab and click in, and we can see that we have our Cost Center report attached. If we double click to ensure that it's formatted correctly, we can see that it's formatted a little bit differently than what we had seen in our own Cost Center Variance report, but all the necessary components and information are still here. We can see that it has the time information, that this Cost Center Variance report covers the current fiscal year from periods 1 to periods 12. And if we scroll down the report to about halfway, we'll still see that all of the expense accounts or cost elements are shown, as well as their planned values, their budgeted values, and their variance values as well. So if we scroll down a little bit more, here we are, and we're met with each individual expense account. We have our actual costs, planned costs, our numerical value, or our numerical variance, and our variance percentage. So once we've confirmed that this is indeed the correct report that we want to send off to Art, we can navigate to the back icon located to the left of the SAP logo and click on it, and we'll be returned to our SAP emailer. And now we can navigate to the Document Contents tab and add Art Vandelay as the recipient to the email. So if we remember from previous emails, all we have to do to add Art as the recipient is type in Art's first name and hit the Enter key on our keyboard, and SAP will populate his name. And now we can go ahead and give this email a much more eye-catching and descriptive title. I will enter in an example title, but once again, your title should be more descriptive, more eye-catching, and something that tells Art expressly what will be contained in the email that he finds in his inbox. After we've successfully entered our descriptive and detailed title, we can go ahead on and write our 4 to 5 sentence analysis on the numbers that can be found within the attached Cost Center Variance Report and what their implications are for GBI. Once again, my analysis will be very short and will only serve as an example, but your analysis should be 4 to 5 sentences and really go into detail about some of the major points of the Cost Center Variance Report. You can consider things like which cost element or expense account has the highest favorable variance, and what implications does that variance have for GBI. Conversely, you could say which cost element or expense account has the highest unfavorable variance, and what implications does that have for GBI. And you could even talk about, based off of the variances for each expense, what conclusions regarding the budgeting methods of GBI would you state to Art? Would you say that the budgets are on the right track, or maybe they could be modified to more accurately reflect the costs that have been actually incurred in the period? Now, once we've completely written out our analysis regarding the Cost Center Variance Report, we can review our email to make sure that we have all the necessary components before we send it to Art. So we can see we have our descriptive and detailed title. We have our analysis that goes into detail about what the numbers found in the cost center variance report actually mean and their implications for the business. We have Art Vandelay listed as our recipient, and if we check the attachments tab, we see that our cost center's actual plan variance report is attached. So to send this off to Art's inbox, we can navigate to the top menu bar to the envelope icon and click on it to send it off to Art. Now once we've sent it, we can navigate back to SAP Standard Menu by finding the exit icon on the top menu bar and clicking it. You may get a message prompted by SAP that's just confirming that you'd like to exit the report. And because we're done, we can go ahead and click yes. And once more to exit back through the organizational structure screen, and we're back at SAP Standard Menu. And with that, we've completed the direct posting and financial reporting process within SAP S/4HANA. As a quick review of what we did today, we started off in the concept section of our session and reviewed some of the basic terms that pertain to direct posting and financial reporting, as well as the SMART framework. After we completed the concept section, we hopped into SAP S/4HANA for ourselves and got into the application section of our session. In the application section, we entered 5 separate accounting entries, directly into the SAP General Ledger. And then we viewed 4 separate reports that were generated based off of the information that we posted to the ledger. We viewed the General Ledger report, which gave us a brief overview of the balances of the different accounts found within the SAP General Ledger. We viewed the cash flow statement, which allowed us to view the different impacts of the transactions that we posted on our individual cash account based on their references of operating, financing, and investing. We took a look at the income statement and analyzed the performance of GBI based off of their sales revenue, their expenses, their cost of goods sold, and took a look at how much they had in profit. And the last report we viewed was the cost center variance report, which allowed us to take a look at the actually incurred values of the expenses throughout the period versus their budgeted values that were created at the beginning of the period. Based off of this information, we analyzed the variances were created to see whether or not we actually saved money and spent less than we budgeted for, or spent a little bit too much money and incurred more costs than we had budgeted for at the beginning of the period. This concludes our direct posting and financial reporting within SAP S/4HANA session. I hope you learned a little bit about both how the direct posting and financial reporting process works within SAP, as well as conceptually. I'd like to thank you for joining me today, and until next time, I'm Adam Dabrowski, and this is the STARChronicle Series, Explorations in SAP S/4HANA for the Digital Learner. Thank you.